Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптя посорбати довбані щі, та трохи в ущах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
Good evening, everybody.
And tonight we have great news as it appears that the Ukrainians are now managing to regain their defensive positions and prepare to ensure that the Russians will be stopped dead in their tracks. Of course, I don't want to give away too much information about exactly what the Ukrainians are doing, but from the news we've gotten today, it appears that the Russians have been halted and their offensive will now grind to a complete stop once again as the Ukrainians have now managed to regain their defenses. We're going to cover that news later on today, as the only area on the front line that has loads of action in it now is specifically around Severodonetsk in the Lyman and Popasna area, and so we will of course revisit that here in a second. But let's go over tonight's schedule and let's see what we've got in store. First off, we're going to be starting off in Kyiv today, as we have a small bit of news showing that the Ukrainians are trying to mobilize more troops as the war is going on. We'll then be moving up to cover some news near the northern front as well, kind of the same category of news. We'll then actually move to our location unknowns and cover the location unknowns first before we go to the Russian news tonight. We'll then be moving to the Russian news and also answering the, three questions from the chat before we do. We'll then cover the Russian news that we've seen in Moscow today and also Belgorod, and then we will immediately go back into Ukraine and start covering the northern front and also the news that's been occurring down here in the Severodonetsk area. I'm going to actually cut out saying the Donbass now, because this isn't really Donbass news anymore. This entire area has pretty much become an offensive of its own, and so we are going to cover it as kind of like a separate category now, as it is the most active area of the front line as of the day. So we're now afterwards going to move downwards from the Severodonetsk area and towards the rest of the Donbass, specifically the Donetsk Oblast, and we're going to answer another 3 questions from the chat here. Then after that, we will cover that news and the rest of the Southern Front news, which we actually have a sizable amount of today. And then we're going to move on to some international news. We have a small amount of it today. Of course, all of it's revolving around aid, and it's wonderful to hear that a whole bunch of countries are once again prepping to send even more aid, and of course, better than before. So very good to hear that the aid continues to flow in, and countries are stepping up and providing even better equipment than they did initially. After that, we will then revisit Kyiv and go over the speech from President Zelensky, and then that will wrap up today's news. So we have a lot in store tonight. Make sure to hit the like button if you would like this news to reach more people. It does help out a lot, and if you would like to support this channel without having to send in a super chat, putting a like in is the best way to do that. Also, commenting in the chat is another great way to support the channel, because it due to the viewer activity, it will promote it to more people, and more people will hear this news, which I think is very important to hear. So we're now going to start off in Kyiv today, where we can see that the 114th is in the process of being trained. This, of course, is a territorial defense brigade, which means that it is raised out of civilian population and is not, per se, contract soldiers that the Ukrainians have. Here we can see them in training near Kyiv, getting familiar with all kinds of systems. We can see them using a PKP and also RPG-7s. We can now see them loading up an ammo belt for one of those PKPs. And we can now see them training on formations, how to advance, and also, most likely, how to fight in trenches. We can see them training the whole 9 yards and also using live ammunition, and with that, the video begins to loop. A lot of people have been asking the question of where are the Ukrainian reserves and what are they doing? And the answer to that is it does take a while to levy reserves. Some people have been saying that these haven't materialized. They are in training, and one does have to remember it usually takes about 2 months minimum time to train up new soldiers completely from the ground up and then send them forward to the front lines, and that's giving them the quickest crash course of information they can. Back during Vietnam, it was actually common, and I believe it's still common in boot camps to this day here in the United States, for training to occur from anywhere in between 8 to 11 months before some of those soldiers then go on to job training, which can be another well, not 8 to 11 months, 8 to 11 weeks. And then once they go on to job training, because some of them do have to get job training, that could then be another 8 to 11 weeks tacked on. So you can see that for an American soldier alone, the amount of time they spend training to just start fighting is an incredibly long amount of time. And we can see the Ukrainians are still training units to then be sent to the front lines in the defense of the country. we're now going to be moving north, where we can see that the Ukrainians have been responding to Belarusian buildups on the border, and also the Belarusians have been conducting some war games as well near the border over the past few days. This, of course, has alarmed the Ukrainians. Actually, it's been the past 2 weeks, more like. And this has been alarming the Ukrainians because they've been fearful that the Belarusians are setting up some kind of ploy, and they're now going to join into the war and try and push down towards Ukraine on their own. So what the Ukrainians have done today is a little bit of posturing, and we can see here in this video that Ukrainian troops have been exercising near the border as well, sending a message of force to the Belarusians and showing them that the Ukrainians are no one to mess with. Here's that video. Unfortunately, I have to keep it muted, but here we can see Ukrainian soldiers in some open fields training with all kinds of weapons and vehicles. We can see here a soldier apparently firing an RPG-7, I believe. I can't really tell for certain. That looks a lot like an RPG-7. We can now see them advancing behind a BRDM-2, and also with some kind of a makeshift technical that looks kind of like a Chevy. We can now see the soldiers advancing through the field, and now getting behind the BRDM. They are now advancing through the field, and we can see that by and large, of course, in the training exercise, they are very well put together, and this is exactly, I guess you could say, mirroring how well the Ukrainian units operate and fight on the front lines there, because we've known for months on end, after video of seeing the Ukrainians fight, they actually operate like this on the front lines, unlike what the Russians show, because the Russians will show training footage much like this, and then when we see their units actually fighting on the front lines on film, it is not at all like that. So it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still managing to actually carry through on their training, I guess you could say, and actually conduct these kinds of formations and tactics on the field. We can now see that they've laid down some smoke grenades, and it appears that they were simulating evacuating a wounded soldier. And now it appears that they are simulating a small withdrawal as some soldiers are starting to pull back. We can now see the technical, along with what appeared to be an ambulance behind it, withdrawing down the road. We can now see them simulating medical care on one of the soldiers. We can now see the technical moving down the road, and also a Ukrainian that was pulling a really brave tactic. Take a look at that. Let's go back to that real quick. This guy's apparently hanging on to the foot rail, I guess you could say. I'm not really sure if there even is one on that kind of truck. I'd have to look at it again. And apparently hanging on to the top rail as well. And that's something that I'm always leery about doing in real life, because I've never had a good experience with that. I always feel like I'm about to fall off, and it looks like he's handling it pretty well, but the truck is going pretty fast, honestly, with someone hanging off the side of it. We can now see them still simulating medical care and evacuating the soldier into the ambulance. We can now see what may be an after-action report where they're briefed on how well they did. We can now see a Ukrainian giving an interview. Okay, there's no music here, thank the Lord, so...
Під час тренування були відпрацьовані питання підйом підрозділу по сигналу, переміщення підрозділу в район розгортання, виявлення диверсійно-розвідувальної групи противника і знищення підрозділу противника. Мета, яка була поставлена на початку навчань, досягнута, питання вирішено в повному обсязі.
Now I have to mute it again. Of course, YouTube's going to come down here and smack my knees out. But we can actually see that they've done, apparently, a very good job in this exercise, and hopefully have sent a message to the Belarusians that they are no one to be messed with. Of course, that message has already been sent before, showing how well the Ukrainians repelled the Russians north of Kyiv nearly 3 months ago at this point. And so I'm sure that the Ukrainians won't join in the war, but the Ukrainians want to make sure to send the message that if they do, it's going to be nothing but trouble. So, of course, great to see. And with that, we are now going to hop down the country to our location unknowns for today and cover those right after that. So starting off today, we have an incredibly interesting film, and also I highly suggest you'll stick around here for a little bit because we actually have some incredible news of a dogfight that occurred over Kherson today. Of course, everyone thought that the Ukrainian Air Force was almost out of the action, but based off of the news we've heard today, it appears that they are still kicking, and we got a little bit of a reminder of what the ghosted Kyiv used to be. So we're now going to take a look at this footage here, where we can see a Ukrainian unit shooting down a Ka-52 with Piorin man-pads provided by the Polish. Here in this video, we can see the camera looking out to the distance with a soldier with a Piorin. We can now see them scoping out the helicopter that they're about to shoot down. You can't really see it on film, but they're now preparing to fire. You can hear the landing of the rockets in the distance.
Вон, иди. Низко идет.
Быстро йде дуже.
Дуже быстро. Дуже быстро, низко.
Вон ще один йде.
We can now see the soldier getting low and beside the Piorin, and we can actually see here for a second, let me pause that and rewind it. You can see there for a second the Ka-52 firing off its barrage of rockets, which does let us know that there is a Ka-52 out there in the distance. Until now, we couldn't really tell, but we can tell for certain that there is a Russian helicopter out there, most likely a Ka-52. We can then hear the Piorin spool up, that's that little screeching sound, and then you'll hear the missile fire. The first missile's on the way, and we're about to see something nuts, because then they fire a second one. And it is also on the way. And from what we are able to tell, the Ka-52 didn't make it out.
Михалыч! Есть! Поход попали! Вон ще две! Кидают ловушки, хоть низом.
And so with that, it's great to see that the Ukrainian man-pads are actually still being used to great effect and shooting down helicopters. Now, a lot of y'all are probably wondering, how in the world can we actually tell that that Ka-52 was shot down? And that's because there was this one-off explosion.
Михалыч!
I'm trying to find it again, but there was a one-off explosion. It was a single explosion, and that's most likely the helicopter hitting the ground, and most likely its fuel erupting. Of course, the Ukrainians did confirm that this was a Ka-52 shot down, but of course, we like to look at video evidence and see if we can see that for ourselves. So I'm trying to hear that report one more time, and hopefully y'all can hear it too.
Yeah!
Right there, that was it. Let me play that one more time.
Yeah!
Notice how it didn't sound like the report of rockets firing or hitting their target, because most of the time, that's multiple hits within a short span of time. But in this video, you could specifically hear just one single explosion, which is most likely the Ka-52 blowing up over the horizon. Unfortunately, we don't see the plume of smoke coming up from the crash afterwards, but the Ukrainians did confirm the kill, and of course, I'll trust the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians usually don't lie about that kind of stuff for the most part. The Russians lie 24/7 about those kinds of kills, but the Ukrainians usually don't. So I'm going to take their credit for it, and hopefully we can get some follow-up video within the coming days showing that Ka-52 burning in the plains. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see an Italian FH-70 in use. Of course, people love to add music to these videos and also add some effects to it to match the music. So, sadly, I can't play the music, but the effects were pretty nice. Here we can see the FH-70 being rolled into position. Now they are preparing it to fire. We can now see them taking a better look at the piece as they are still preparing it to fire, and they fire the first shot. They now open up the breach again, and they prepare to reload the piece again. Of course, Ukrainian artillery is one of the best in the world in terms of accuracy as far as we've seen these days, and we can hopefully see that the FH-70 will live up to that hype and make sure that the Ukrainian artillery is as accurate as possible. Unfortunately, I'm not really knowledgeable about the FH-70 to a large degree. I don't know what kind of munitions it can use, but considering that it is firing a 155mm shell, I feel like it's most likely made to a NATO standard where the ammunition is cross-compatible with the M777. I'm not really sure about that entirely though, but that is usually kind of like a NATO standard to make sure that each country's weapons have cross-compatible ammunition with the others. I can actually pull up some information after this video's over while we watch this beautiful montage of the FH-70 firing. It's an incredibly good looking piece, honestly. And I know I'm kind of biased, but I think all artillery pieces look pretty cool. But anyways, we're about to go check out some information and see if the ammunition is made to be cross-compatible and all pieces are made to fire the same kind of ammunition. I feel like that would be in the best interests of NATO as a defensive alliance, considering that M777 ammo could just be transported anywhere and then given to FH-70s and then fired from them. So I'm going to have to check that out, but I feel like that's most likely the case. We can now see them getting on their way, of course, practicing the shoot and scoot philosophy, and the Ukrainians hardly get bested with that kind of principle. So with that, let's actually pull up, does NATO require standardization? I think that need to share common sets of standards. Allows for more efficient use of resources and thus enhances the effectiveness of the alliance's defense capabilities. I feel like that's generally an overarching protocol as far as ammunition and such things like that, because I know that a large amount of countries, for example, the Leopard 2A5 and the M1A1 and the M1A2 practically use the same gun. It's a smoothbore 120 millimeter. I believe on the German tank it's called the L44, but on the American tank it gets a different American designation, but they're practically the same gun, and I believe they can actually use the same kind of ammunition, but I may be mistaken with that. But I believe that that's the principle of NATO arms in general, is that the ammunition is supposed to be cross-compatible, so that way any country can supply its other allies with the arms and ammunition it has. So, of course, a very interesting principle, and so hopefully the FH-70 can use the same ammunition that the M777 is using, and then get the same kind of accuracy that the M777 has been showing, along with the Caesar SPG. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a BMP get destroyed by a mine. Now, of course, this is something we see a lot on this channel, but it's always great to revisit it. No one ever complains watching a Russian tank blow up, I don't think, and so we're going to watch this one again. Here we can see a BMP rolling down the road as fast as it can, and I think the Russians' minds were blown by that explosion. I don't think they expected that. I think we're seeing a second clip here. It looks like there's a vehicle over here on the side near the tree line. We can also see some smoke emanating in the background, but we don't really know from where. I think that BTR, I actually think that's a BTR. It looks like a wheeled vehicle, not a tracked vehicle. And we can see it still sitting on the side of the road. Of course, derelict. It did run over a mine, and it looks like it blew up the entire front of the tank. Well, the APCs, more like it. We can actually see a ditched tank up here. It looks like it's fallen off the road and into this large ditch. So I don't know if that was kind of like dug out as a tank trap or not, but it appears that that's what it became. We can now see them taking a good look at this. Yes, that is actually a BMP-2 for sure. And we can actually see a few Russians that may have been riding on top of the vehicle still kind of like crawling around and wondering why in the world were they even sent to Ukraine to fight in the first place. So with that, that is the end of the video. once again, great to see that Russian vehicles are getting the hurt put on them, and that the Russians are continuing to have a difficult time advancing. We're about to get to that in a second, actually, what's happened in the Lyman and Popasna area, because while they have made advances over the past few days, the Ukrainians' defensive lines have stabilized, and we've also gotten a pretty good idea that they've taken a massive amount of losses, gaining the small amount of ground that they've gotten now. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Ukrainian company get some very lucky product placement as this soldier is snacking while the MLRS fires in the background. Unfortunately, I'm not really familiar with Ukrainian products, honestly, but still at the same time, we can see that he's eating some kind of potato chips, maybe? And so hopefully someone over there in Ukraine knows what kind of brand of potato chips these are, because they just got free product placement with one of the best fighting armies in the world right now, pretty much pairing up against the Russians. So hopefully that potato chip company gets an increase in sales, and the soldier is enjoying his snack while the grad does the work in the background. A really cool picture, honestly, and it's actually kind of chill, really, which is interesting to me. Anyways, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Russians trying to peddle old videos as new. And I had to show this one today because the caption was just hilarious. I don't know if it's been deleted. It hasn't been deleted. Okay, I can show it to y'all. This is supposedly from today, and it's an alleged sniper from the Donetsk People's Republic hitting a Ukrainian on film. And they didn't hit the Ukrainian. From what I could see, they missed. And then on top of that, this is winter, and it hasn't snowed in months in Ukraine, and so this video is as old as the start of the war, and the Russians have put it out today trying to act like it's brand new. So let's take a look at this video, and let's see how much of a lie this entire caption was. You can actually see the two Ukrainian soldiers. Here's the one that's about to be shot at, and then there's a second Ukrainian soldier somewhere over here where my mouse cursor is circling, just for y'all to know at the start of the video. And so the sniper is lining up the shot, and he fires, and I gotta say, I don't know what he shot, but this thing has, like, the bullet arc of a 45-70. Like, I don't know what he's using, but he had to elevate that shot so freaking high. He nearly lobbed the thing in. So I don't know what kind of gun it is, but must be... Well, I don't know how far the shot is and how magnified this is, like the film, but still... My God, I don't know what kind of round that is, but it's probably low-powered for sure. Anyways, the round goes flying in, and it misses him on film! And the Russians are trying to push the story that this hit him. But you can clearly see it go to the right side of the tree and not on him. Well, let's watch that one more time, and let's see that. Okay, let me back up a little bit. There we go. There goes the shot. And it lands on the right side of the tree. It completely missed the guy, but they're trying to make it sound like this DPR sniper hit this guy dead on. We can now see he got freaked out by the shot for a second, and now he's ducked to cover, and the other soldier who was right beside him has also run off as well. So, in the end, it's not even a video from today. They tried to push it as a video from today, and then they showed a quote-unquote sniper firing a round that pretty much had to go into the orbit around the Earth to be able to reach the target, and then it missed completely and flew to the right side of the tree instead of the left side. You can't make this stuff up. Russian propaganda is probably some of the worst on earth, because whatever they show is almost a clear lie, just like this video. And I had to show this one to y'all because it was hilarious that they were trying to push this snow-covered film as something that's happened just right now. It was silly to me, and also you could clearly see that the soldier was not hit. So with that is the end of that bit of location unknown news, and we're now going to move on to the next one. Here we can actually see from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. I actually found out that the Ministry of Defense website publishes its own casualty reports, and so I actually found it today, and let's go over the numbers. These are the Russian losses from the very beginning of this war on the 24th of February to today. Literally, I believe just a few hours ago, if I'm correct. So we can see that the Russians have lost 29,750 soldiers killed. 29,750 soldiers killed. 150 extra were killed just today. And we don't even know how many have been wounded. That kind of number is a little hard to come by. We've seen that 1,322 tanks have been knocked out, an additional 7 being wiped out today. We can see that 3,246 armored personnel carriers have been wiped out, an extra 11 today. Another 6 artillery pieces taken out. No MLRSs, no anti-aircraft vehicles, no aircraft, but that will change here in a second. I think the Ukrainians are going to update their numbers tomorrow because we do know of one Su-35 that got shot down today. No helicopter shot down. 1 drone was shot down. 1 cruise missile was shot down. 1 fuel tank, well, actually, it may have been a logistical truck as well, may have been knocked out. And we're starting to see that the numbers are certainly piling up. 1,300 is getting around the ballpark of exactly half of the operational tanks in the Russian armed forces all together across the entirety of their military. And so once the Ukrainians reach about 1,500, that means only 50% of Russia's operational tanks will be left once this war is over at that point. We can also see that, I guess you could say, logistically, I know that everyone's always heard me talk about logistics, but at the same time, logistically, we can see that the Russians are going to be suffering for sure in that regard, because they've lost over half of the logistics vehicles that they entered this war with. Just for y'all to know, the Russians only have about 4,000 supply trucks, and we've seen 2,225 of them get knocked out. So that's definitely over half, and I know that either they're having to lessen the amount of forces that are active on the front lines, and we can see proof of that just by the lack of news around the entirety of it, or they're having to requisition civilian vehicles, which can carry a lot less most of the time, specifically the Russian ones that they're requisitioning. From what we can see, they're carrying a lot less, require more drivers to do as much work, and they're going to be largely inefficient. So I think at this point, the Russian logistics are nearly falling apart. And we've also gotten news from the Ministry of Defense today that they're bringing in railroad brigades. They're trying to build back the railroads that were destroyed by the Ukrainians, so that way they can use the railroads and try and once again lighten that logistical burden and help the troops get supplied easier. Hopefully the Ukrainians can interdict that. We don't know how long it's going to take for the Russians to rebuild those railroads in the Kharkiv area in particular, but that's still something interesting to note, and it does show that the Russians are having such glaring supply issues that they're now going to literally try and build the railheads almost within miles of the front line, which is unheard of and makes them susceptible to attacks from artillery. So with that, it's great to see that the Russians are still taking large losses, and we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see an Azov prisoner laughing in the face of his Russian captors. Now, this is something that I thought was great, and it shows that even the morale of the prisoners is still high. I mean, like, look at this face that this guy gives us. This guy right here, the Russian is talking to the camera, and this guy is looking at him like, get a load of this guy. It's hilarious, honestly, to think about that. This guy doesn't even care if he's a prisoner. He's going to sit there and get the last laugh on the Russians regardless. So let's look at that one more time. Just look at that guy's face. I love it. It's great. And so while he may be a prisoner, they still have not imprisoned his morale and his spirit for Ukraine. So of course, great to see, and it's good to know that even the prisoners are still in high spirits. Of course, hopefully the Russians don't mistreat them, and hopefully a prisoner exchange is on the horizon for these Azov prisoners. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Stugna knocking out another Russian vehicle. Y'all heard that right. It hasn't happened once, it hasn't happened twice, it has happened again already. And of course I do have to mute it. But we can see again today that another Russian vehicle was knocked out by a Stugna. Here we can see that they fired the piece. The round is on the way. Unfortunately, we can't see it too well because the screen is a little blurry. But here in a second, we're about to see a little poof of an explosion, and that will let us know that the Stugna has hit the target. And it hit dead on. Once again, Stugnas and their accuracy, I've never really seen one miss. Speaking about Stugna accuracy, and I think that's really something when you think about usually weapons have like a 50% chance of a hit, like anti-air missiles. Anti-air missiles, like surface-to-air missiles, usually have a success rate of back in the 70s, like 20-something%. And we've never seen a Stugna miss on film. We've never seen the Russians proving that, and we've never seen the Ukrainians showing any of that. So that's really interesting to me and wonderful to know that the Ukrainian defense is still operating strong, and they have enough supplies to keep those Stugnas running, well, those Stugnas running. And so with that, we're about to go on to our last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see that the Ukrainians have not only been destroying Russian combat vehicles, they are once again destroying the bread and butter of a Russian offensive. This is something that hasn't been covered a lot lately, because while logistics do win wars, there hasn't been a lot of logistics news lately to talk about. The war's just kind of gone on how it's happened, and we've been talking about the strategic outlook of the war recently, and not the logistical outlook. But today we can see that the Ukrainians are following up on making sure that they take care of the most important Russian units on the field. And here in this clip, we can see that the Ukrainians have managed to destroy another Russian logistics convoy. Here's the video.
Колонна, для тех, кто будет писать, что это якобы украинская колонна, ну, можем посмотреть. Рус. И вот все, что случилось с российской колонной, которая пришла в
And
Украину.
just
Вот.
vehicle after vehicle. Let's take a look at that again and let's see if we can get a count. 1, 2. I think that's still the second one. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. It looks like there was a vehicle being carried on top of another one. 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we got the 8th one over here. So 8 supply vehicles in one location. They knocked out an entire, pretty much logistics convoy in the literal formation it was driving in. I don't know what they hit it with to be able to do that, but still crazy to me, and I can't believe it. We haven't seen something like this in about 3 weeks. And so, well, actually, no, I'm sorry, correction, about a week and a half. But still, it's crazy to see that the Ukrainians are still managing to do this so late into the war, and that the Russians are still putting logistics convoys with how precious they are, and how many few logistics trucks they have left, and they're still putting them in jeopardy like this, where an entire convoy can be wiped out. That's honestly insane to me, and so I'm going to let the video continue.
Пришла в Украину, вот. 31, 33, 87 Рус. Всякие грузовики. БТРы, там все прочее. Что только тут нет. Сейчас еще танки.
Of course, wonderful to see that the Ukrainians have managed to knock out another supply convoy again. We haven't seen that often, and it's great to know that the Ukrainians are still running at full force to defend their country. Of course, one thing I would like to say is that we've been reporting somewhat grimmer news lately about what's been going on in Severodonetsk, and I want everyone to understand this, at least from me. Y'all, everyone has to remember that Ukraine is in a defensive war, and while we were spoiled for a while about hearing of nothing but Ukrainian successes and exploits, it is a defensive war, and so they don't always have to be pushing the Russians back to be considered winning. If a lot of y'all have been around for a long time, you may remember that I used to say, to win a defensive war, all you have to do is hold your ground and ensure that the enemy does not get any extra ground, and if they do, they have to incur heavy losses to take it. And I haven't said that in a while, but that is something very important to note, because the Ukrainians, although being pushed back a little bit and now regaining their defenses like it was before, one does have to remember that they have literally destroyed half of the theater of war here in the northern front. They literally gave the Russians such a hard time that they had to withdraw from the Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy area and the rest of the northern front that they controlled all the way down to Okturka. And so you have to remember that when thinking about this war, is that while Ukraine has lost over the past few days a few battles, and they've been somewhat small, but of course the overlying, like the highways, the overlying idea is that they may be a little bit major here in the future. They are still, as of this moment, winning this war. While the Ukrainians are saying that things are getting difficult down there, there's going to be a little bit more that, well, actually, I'm going to cover it now instead of holding that for later. This is really important to cover right now since I'm on this. The Russians have lost the ability to push massive offensives, and the only area we see them actually making any ground is at Lyman and Popasna, and they've now been stopped today. We haven't heard of any more ground being made. At least from our reports that we're getting. That might change tomorrow, but right now, the defenses have solidified again, and the Ukrainians are holding their ground. So we only see news coming out of this one small area, and if I actually circled this and made it an area of its own, Let me see if I can real quick, and let's see how many square miles this little area encompasses. So this whole area is 994 square miles, which in perspective is an incredibly small area. And this is the only place in the entire front line where we see the Russians conducting any kind of actions whatsoever. We don't see the Russians conducting any more offensives near Izium, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Kryvyi Rih, Mykolaiv, Kherson, anywhere. The offensives have entirely stalled across the entirety of the front lines. In fact, nothing is happening across most of the front lines that we don't even see any news coming out anymore. Like from the Kharkiv salient, we don't see anything coming out there from either side. It's completely stopped. And the Russians don't have any ideas in the future of trying to push there. They're literally just trying to build railheads to make sure that the forces that are left there, which are mostly DPR and LPR troops mixed in with a few Russians, will be getting supplies to make sure that they just don't starve in the meantime of trying to defend this small salient. The same thing can be said near Chuhuiv and also on the entire Severodonetsk reservoir. The Russians have literally stalled everywhere. The only place that they've been able to manage to do anything is here near the Lyman and Popasna area. And the reason why is because they've diverted all of their resources, their best equipment, their best soldiers, and a new strategy into this one area alone. And they're praying that they'll finally be able to take the entirety of the Luhansk Oblast and maybe try and take the rest of the Donetsk Oblast, although that is a massive stretch. Because if you look at the amount of land they have to cover, and I'll draw up the border of Donetsk real quick just to show. I mean, like, they have to cover an area that is that much more. We'll just keep that line like that. They literally have to push the Ukrainians back that much to take the entirety of the Donbass. And we can only see them making a 5-mile breakthrough at Lyman and another 5-mile breakthrough beyond Popasna towards Vasilivka. And when you really think about that in perspective, while these offensives, of course, come as a little bit of a shock to some people, they're not large. And they're threatening, you know, of course, they're threatening the frontline situation, but they're not threatening the overall strategic situation of Ukraine's defenses as a whole. So before anyone, like, panics and tries to pass judgment that it's over for the Ukrainians, that you've lost, you do have to remember that for a while, there were literally Russian forces slowly grinding their way across the eastern side of Ukraine towards Kyiv, and they actually managed to reach Brovary. One does have to remember that that did happen before, and the Ukrainians were able to pull off a miracle at the Marne in a way and push the Russians all the way back to Novobasan before the Russians decided to withdraw. And if I drew a line there, I mean, from Brovary to Novobasan, that was a pushback of 35 miles. That was a massive breakthrough on the part of the Ukrainians. So don't worry too much about this, because while it has been a little bit concerning that the Russians did make some advances, it appears that the Ukrainians have adapted so far to the Russians' new airborne and mechanized brigade strategy that they've been using to create breakthroughs, and hopefully nothing else will change. Also, one other thing that we do have to point out that's also really important here is that there is still a defensive barrier in its own right on the Severodonetsk River. If the Ukrainians get pushed over to the other side, because I don't believe it's a once, I believe they might not be pushed back to the other side, at least entirely. Once the Ukrainians get pushed back to the Severodonetsk River, how are the Russians going to continue an offensive in that direction? The answer is they really can't, because that river is pretty much a natural obstacle that they will not be able to cross. We've already seen them try to conduct 2 river crossings, and both times they've been thwarted, and one time they lost an entire 2.5 BTGs from what we could tell on camera. So, with that in mind, they're not going to be able to successfully push across the Severodonetsk River, which is this light blue line on the map, and that's going to completely stop them dead in their tracks if they ever push the Ukrainians back. I mean, like, as an example, they've been here on the Severodonetsk River near Rubizhne for around a week and a half at this point. This front line has not changed. The Russians tried to cross the bridge here, and then they got slaughtered. And they haven't been able to try it again because the chance of actually succeeding in a river crossing and setting up a foothold on the other side to threaten Severodonetsk and Lysychansk is very small. It's not going to lead to a great success. It's most likely going to be a massive failure. So once again, keep that in mind, that the Ukrainians, if pushed back, will be in a very good defensive position once again. So with that, I hope I've kind of explained that pretty well, because that's something that I think a lot of people should know. And it's not trying to be a propagandist or anything and say that the Ukrainians are still in a wonderful position. I mean, like, they are in a good position, but at the same time, they have gotten a little bit of pushback. But don't worry, you can lose a few battles. You don't have to win every single one, and you can still manage to win the war. One thing that we know for sure is that the Russians have had to churn out tons of tanks that they really don't have to sacrifice anymore, and a ton of soldiers that have been killed to gain the small amount of ground that they have near Popasna and Lyman. So just keep that in mind, and in that aspect, the Ukrainians are still winning this defensive war. And so with that, we've now covered all of the location unknown news, and I've also gone through my little, I guess, conversation street as to why the Ukrainians are still in a fairly good position, and why, while the Russians have been advancing, it's not as bad as it seems. So with that, we are now going to move on to the Russian news. But before we do, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to move on and cover what's occurred in Russia today. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So good evening, everybody. It is Enforcer Matt, as you know. Before we move to the questions, I just want to mention the results of our poll that I just ran a minute ago. It was about everyone's opinion on Ukraine's defense. So the first option was they're doing great, and 59% of you said that Ukraine is doing great at defending their country. 38% of you said they are doing okay, and 3% said they're doing terribly. So, Enforcer, I'm not sure if you had a chance to take a look at that poll yet, but that's quite interesting results.
Actually, I didn't, and that's really something interesting to bring up there. So 60% of y'all think the Ukrainian defenses are doing great. That means that y'all think that the defensive positions they've set up now are superb, and overall, they're doing an incredibly good job at defending their country. 38% of y'all are believing that they're doing okay, but it could be better, which is understandable, of course, but at the same time, it is a war, and you can't win everything. But still, I understand where y'all are coming from. And finally, 3% of y'all are saying they're doing terribly. So that's actually a pretty interesting poll. So if you want, Matthew, we can shut that one down now, now that we've seen that. Actually, some interesting results right there. And also, everyone give a huge thanks to Matthew for setting that poll up. He did that entirely on his own, and I actually thought it was a pretty interesting result. So with that, we're now going to move on to the questions, and then we will return right back to the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up, we don't have a question, but we do have a donation from MNG, who puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, M. We appreciate the support very much. And I'm sure the Enforcer has something to say about that.
Yes, I do. I thank you so much for the support, M. Of course, all the support that all of our viewers gives us helps us to run this channel. And this is something that I feel I kind of need to harp on a pretty decent amount. And that's that we don't do other things that some other channels do, like run ads or anything like that. We make sure to not run ads because I don't like them. And I think that they torture viewers because I'm a viewer. I go on YouTube all the time, and I hate watching ads. And so as someone who's now running a YouTube channel, I'm going to make sure that no ads ever run on our videos, and if they do, it's only because we've lost the monetization rights to that video because it has something copyrighted in it, and then the copyright owner takes it over, and then they get to monetize it. But that's a whole other story. But anyways, so pretty much saying that, we entirely rely on the support of our viewers through like super chats and also merchandise sales to keep the channel afloat. And so I have to thank you incredibly a whole load, because that kind of support literally is the only thing that keeps this channel running. And so I thank you so much once again for the support. It helps us to keep running, and of course we appreciate it more than you could ever know, because that's literally the life's blood of our channel. If we weren't able to get super chats, we would be out on the streets looking for a job pretty much. So thank you once again for the support and helping us to keep on doing what we're doing. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from one of our channel regulars. Praise Adonai puts in a $30 super chat and says, Enforcer, world strategists are beginning to realize that if Ukraine doesn't win this war, that the course of history and strategic power will be changed forever. Can you explain what it'll be like if Russia wins the war?
Well, I can tell you something. Everyone from the start knows how strategically important Ukraine is. For example, if we were to lose Ukraine. Well, it's not really a thing for us to lose. They were never really part of NATO in the first place yet. But still, if Ukraine was to lose and fall under the Russian sphere of influence, this will change the entire NATO front line. I've kind of gone over this a decent bit before. It's a great question too, and I think that it deserves a lot of answers as to why it will change the course of history. First off, it's going to change the balance of food production in the entire world. Instead of food production largely being based inside of a neutral country here in Ukraine, at least for Eastern Europe, it's now going to be within the Russian sphere of influence, or maybe directly within Russia itself, because Russia may annex parts of Ukraine. So with that in mind, that could really start to mess up a lot of the, I guess you could say, foodstuffs markets around the world, because then the Russians will kind of have negotiating power on where that food will go. One other thing that you could consider, of course, is that most of the food that Ukraine produces actually goes to Middle Eastern countries and African countries, and so the Russians, through their food, could pretty much, I guess you could say, blackmail Middle Eastern countries like the Syrian Democratic Forces, which kind of divides Syria up into two right now, the Bashar al-Assad regime. I'm so sorry for butchering that, but they kind of split the country in two right down this highway from Araka to Al-Mayadin. They pretty much control everything east of that, and the Russians could, of course, blackmail them that if you do not join Bashar al-Assad, which is the government that they support, we will stop sending food, because most of their food, I believe, still comes from Ukraine. So they could start to do stuff like that to leverage many countries in the Middle East, because while energy is important, like oil and such things like that, food is literally a basic tenet of human life. And so that could be something that the Russians, of course, could start to leverage strategically. Another thing that they could leverage if the Ukrainians ever happen to lose, which I don't think is possible, it's still an interesting avenue to go down, because it's very important in showing why the defense of Ukraine is important to the entirety of the world, is that strategically for NATO, this is going to change the front lines drastically. The closest thing that NATO would be near, if we managed to lose Ukraine and became Russian aligned like Belarus is, the only strategic target we would have within a short reach of our current front line would be St. Petersburg, which, beyond it being a port city in the north, really has no strategic value beyond that. It's kind of like that's kind of a hard one to say. I mean, like, it is a major port city, that it does have, but at the same time, it's not necessarily something that would generally like hinder the Russian economy. Now, one of the fleets of the Russian Navy is based out of St. Petersburg, but at the same time, that fleet would most likely be in direct conflict as soon as the war started, in the Baltic Sea, and also the Gulf of Bothnia, I believe it's pronounced. I've never gotten that one right. So that's something of strategic value that we could, of course, attack. But if Ukraine was to fall into Russian hands, the Russians would be within striking distance from multiple fronts of major Romanian cities, Slovakian cities, Hungarian cities, and Polish cities, which are all NATO aligned. So that would, of course, put the NATO alliance at great risk of having this large front line, where instead of us having strategic targets to attack like Volgograd, which is the key to the entire Volga River, the Russians would be able to launch offensives, although I highly doubt they'd ever be successful, into Western countries like all of the ones I just mentioned. So it's in terms of playing like a board game with the rest of the world and saying, okay, what's strategically important, what's not strategically important, and who's going to be put in an advantage or disadvantage depending on which direction Ukraine goes. If Russia was able to win Ukraine and annex it, a lot of Eastern European countries would be in significant threat. Of course, they're a NATO country, so the Russians would most likely never attack them because it would incur World War III. But then again, Putin is a delusional madman. We've already seen him talking about he wants to reclaim parts of Poland and pretty much reform the Russian Empire. And I believe that also includes Finland as well, because they were part of the Russian Empire for quite a while. So, I mean, like, hell, even if they are NATO countries, that may not stop them from being attacked by the Russians, and the Russians would be put at a pretty advantageous position if they were able to actually make Ukraine be put under their own sphere of influence. So in that regard, in terms of playing the international war game, well, not really war game, strategy game, I guess you could call it, it is vital that Ukraine remains neutral or Western aligned, because that puts us at an advantage against the Russians. And while that doesn't sound great, I know a lot of people are like, should the United States and the Western world in general look for advantages over the Russians where they're put at a unfair start if a war was to happen? That is the entire point of pretty much playing a strategic game, is that we're always trying to look for advantages to put our rivals at weaker positions while putting our nation at a stronger position. That's just kind of how the whole entire world boils down. And so we always want to make sure that everything will be aligned properly where we have the advantage over our rivals. And of course, ensuring that Ukraine remains neutral or Western aligned is one of the best ways to do it. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and we're going to move on to the Russian news and also the Severodonetsk news.
And before we move on to the last one of the segment, I just want to say to everybody that is putting in questions in the live chat as well as super chats, don't worry if you put a question in and you don't see a response directly from me. I am putting it in the spreadsheet, so at the end of the stream, we will try to answer as many of those as we can. So I just want to let everybody know, in case you don't see a response from me, don't get worried. Your question isn't going into the black hole, and I am seeing it. So moving on to our final question of the segment, we have a $20 super chat from Brian Dumoth, who says, "Hey from North Texas, now that Russia has shown its true colors as a third-rate power full of corruption, lies, and buffoonery amongst its military, do you think they could sustain a large-scale, multiple-front war?"
No, the answer to that is a flat-out no, and I also thank you very much for the support. It does help out the channel a lot, and I appreciate it. But the flat-out answer to that is, if the Russians were able to capture Ukraine, like the last question asked, and actually move the front line into threatening major cities within Eastern Europe, I don't think they'd ever be able to take advantage of that. We see that their offensive abilities are incredibly small. I mean, look at this actual area here. Let me circle it with my mouse. Where all of these olive markers are at right now is the only area that the Russians are able at this point to carry on an offensive. And look at the absolute scale of a front line they would have with NATO. If they were only able to continue an offensive in that small of an area on the entire front line at one point, they're at an immediate disadvantage, and I don't think they'd be able to carry a multi-front war because they just don't have the logistical abilities to support multiple fronts like that at the moment. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. Once again, we appreciate everyone's support. It's the only way we keep the channel running, and so if you do put in a super chat, we make sure to recognize every single one of them, because we do want to appreciate all of y'all for helping us to keep doing what we're doing and reporting this news. Also, by the way, we are thinking about branching out into more news here in the future. I'm trying to think about how I'm going to work that out, because I've spent a lot of time doing the Ukraine war news every day, and I'm trying to see about branching out and doing other bits of news from all around the world. But right now, it's seeming like a little bit tough to do time management wise, so we're going to see about making that a possibility, but I'm not giving any guarantees. I just want y'all to know that that is on the table right now. So with that, we're now going to move back to the Russian news, and then we're also going to hop down immediately after the Russian news into the Severodonetsk area and go over that in great detail. So with that, let's hop into Moscow and let's see what's going on here. I wonder if the Russians have anything good going on. No, they don't. These are T-80BVs, and if y'all don't know, T-80BVs are old as Methuselah. That's why they look so old. And these tanks are now being loaded onto rail cars and also being sent to Ukraine. This one is so old here on this last train car that it literally has like the 1980s Victory Day Parade camouflage still on it. You can see where they painted the rims white. Let me pull that up for y'all. T-80BV Victory Parade. That looks like they're showing BVMs in these pictures, but let me see. Victory Parade tanks, 1980s. Hopefully this will pull up some pictures. There we go. Nope, that's not a BV. Anyways, I think I'll be able to get the gist across. You can see that they painted back then the wheels on the tanks white. All right, this was in the 80s. This is 40 years ago. This tank has the same paint scheme on it that it had 40 years ago. That lets you know how long that thing's been in storage. It's been in storage for 40 years. The question is, can this thing even run? The answer is no. And based off of the condition of the rail cars behind it, it looks like the entire Russian railroad infrastructure may be in some very dire straits. I mean, like, look at the condition of the rail cars. I mean, like, everything about this is pretty bad. I mean, like, honestly, we'll say this railroad is being run by CSX. Don't come for me, CSX, but still, it's not good. And also, we can see that these tanks are antiquated to get back onto the main picture. And they're now having to draw these out of the reserves to then send to the front to hopefully try and bolster the amount of losses that they've taken during this war. They're literally scraping the barrel right now in the number of operational tanks they actually can field. So with that, very interesting to see, and we can see that it's still not going well for the Russians, and it looks like supply-wise and arms-wise, it's getting even worse. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see the lunatics on Russian TV again, and I have to show these people because they are literally insane. Here we can see them threatening the Germans with nuclear war. Of course, the captions are down below the screen where y'all can't see them, and so I'm going to have to read it off. So here we go. Olaf Scholz is announcing that they can accept the terms dictated by the Russian Federation. Who the hell are you, bastard? Do you think we'll accept your terms? Guess again. If you can't accept our terms, then we'll force you. Scholz should know that. Guys, if you force us to use nuclear weapons, we'll have no other choice. When it lands over there, you bastards, I doubt that the U.S. will attack the Russian Federation. They won't move a muscle. Can you believe the audacity of this guy to sit there and say stuff like this? To say that they would obliterate Germany with nuclear weapons, one of the largest economic powers in Europe and in the world, and the United States wouldn't do anything, although they're one of the major NATO members. This type of stuff is insane. I don't even know why this stuff is allowed on Russian TV, and the only reason I can assume that this kind of stuff is allowed over there is because the Russian government actually believes this to a degree and wants this stuff to be said to the public and hype them up where it's not viewed as a shock when they actually do something like this. But at the same time, I know that the Russians can't be in complete idiot, because they know that if they obliterate the Germans, the entire world's going to obliterate them in a hellfire. It'll occur over like 15-30 minutes, and almost every major world power in the world will become non-existent. So, I just gotta say, it's honestly insane to see what the Russians will threaten to countries like Germany for really doing minor things, honestly, at this point in the war. So, just wanted to show y'all that and show y'all the insanity of this lunatic again. Hopefully someone can teach this guy a lesson about the United States, because I don't know if he's been watching the United States over about the past 70 years or so, but we're not really one to be trifled with, especially by such a minor power economically as the Russians. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten from Moscow, where we can see more lawmakers are stepping up against the war, and you wouldn't believe it, but it's the communists. And I'm not lying, it's literally the communists. You would think that they would be the people who are going, oh yeah, let's do it. But 4 communist members of the Duma in the Far East have called on Vladimir Putin to end the war. And this is always something that blows my mind, is that literally the communists are against this thing. And you would think if anyone in Russia would be for it, it would be the communists, because they most likely would be trying to rebuild the Soviet Union the way it was. But even they're against it. And you gotta wonder how insane the Russian government actually is, that even the communists are speaking common sense at this point over there. Because, I mean, that's insane to me, because I'm not dissing on communists. Of course, I don't pick a political side, and of course, on both sides of the spectrum, on the far right side, you have the fascists, on the far left side, you have the communists. I'm not saying anything about either of them, but when you're looking historically at Russian communists, they had been the ones in Russia who are always talking about, we need to bring the Baltics back into the fold, we need to reform the Eastern Bloc and bring the Soviet Union back in a way, and we can even see them detesting what's going on. And this is like Twala land nearly. This is historically unprecedented, and it's really weird. And so, with that, very interesting to see. And I really don't have anything to comment on this. It's just insane, honestly. And so with that, we're now going to move out of Moscow now that we've ended it on a bombshell, and we're now going to move down to the area of Belgorod, where we do have, of course, more unfortunate news. We can see down here in Belgorod that more Iskanders have been fired in the direction of Ukraine by Russian forces and are most likely being targeted at population centers.
Кошмар. Боже.
We can once again see it looping. And with the launch of that rocket, we do know it's being targeted at a civilian center. Hopefully the Ukrainians can intercept that rocket and shoot it down before it causes any damage. And we do know that most of these missiles, if not all of them, have been targeted at population centers and non-military targets. So, of course, unfortunate to think about. And hopefully the Russians that did launch that missile will be held accountable for their crimes at the end of Ukrainian fire or in a Ukrainian court. Of course, that's highly unlikely. They are firing this missile from somewhere within Russia towards Kharkiv, and so it's very sad to think about, honestly. And so, we're now going to shift a little bit south to the Kharkiv area, and once again, we've been met with no news whatsoever. The Kharkiv front is completely stopped. The Ukrainians appear to have stopped their offensives. Apparently, they got a little bit of pushback, and they decided that it wasn't worth the amount of resources they'd have to expend to completely shut this area off from the Russians, and so they've stopped their offensive. But we've also seen the Russians completely halt any kind of activity on their end in this front. We haven't heard of any shelling. We haven't heard of any retreats. We haven't heard of anything. The Russians are literally at a standstill here right now. The only thing we've heard is from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, because they now have information showing that some railroad brigades have now entered the area, and they're trying to build railheads literally almost up to the front lines, and that tells us that the Russian logistical situation is so poor that they can't even position the railheads anymore further away from the front lines in safety. They're now building them all the way up to the front lines in a desperate attempt to make sure that those units are supplied in some degree or some kind of fashion. So very interesting to note, and it is a blaring example of a failure in the Russian logistics. We're now going to move all the way past the Izium area and Shuhuv area without comment. Once again, no action, so there's nothing to report on there. And we're now going to move down to the Lyman and Popasna area and the Severodonetsk area. This area is kind of the triangle of Russia's activity, and is the only area where we can see the Russians conducting any advance whatsoever. We've seen them been met with limited success over the past few days, but it appears that the Ukrainians have now put a stop to it. The Russian offensive has been stopped right outside of the T-1302 highway for the past 48 hours, with the closest they've ever made it being Vasilivka. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense did report today that artillery fire did land in the villages of Yakovlivka, Biloorivka, and also Berestove. But we haven't actually heard of the Russians pushing out onto these highways, and the Ukrainians said that they conducted an attack here, but it was entirely unsuccessful and the Russians withdrew. So this does let us know that the Russians have been stopped at Vasilivka the last mile and a half before they actually reached the highway. The Ukrainians are going to fight tooth and nail for that highway. It's a strategically important road that leads directly to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. It is, of course, a paved highway, which is a major step up from some of the unpaved dirt roads that you'll find in Ukraine, and it does lead to logistics traveling at a faster speed, allowing for more traffic, and also allowing for a larger amount of supplies in mass being delivered to the front. So it's vital that the Ukrainians defend this highway and ensure that it remains open for logistics convoys to travel up and down. We also have news from the Severodonetsk area, so the front line has gotten a minor shift today, because we do have news that the Chechens have arrived at the Mir Hotel. That's the only change to the front lines we've had so far, rather than this one area, which I considered common sense, and I was able to confirm it today, that there is no population centers in this area for the Ukrainians to defend, and really no defensive ground at all. And so the Russians, of course, have pushed all the way to the Severodonetsk River in this area, and the Ukrainians and the Russians are already on both sides of these rivers. So in terms of the defensive positions for the Ukrainians on the western side of this bulge, I guess you could call it, it's very good. They do have a river bordering the entire length of it, which will make it almost impossible for the Russians to cross. So actually getting to the video evidence and reports we have today, we can see here in the Lyman area that the Russians, along with some, it appears Luhansk Republic forces or DPR forces, have raised a flag over the administrative building in Lyman, letting us know that they have at least captured the central part of the city. We have heard a little bit of news that there still may be fighting out in the suburbs. And we can now see them here, of course, trying to triumphantly wave their flags. But considering that it's cost them hundreds of soldiers and dozens of tanks to make a breakthrough of about 6 miles and then take the center of the city, it's kind of questionable whether those losses were worth it or not. Considering that they can't even use the railhead in Lyman, since both of the railroads leading east and west lead further into Ukraine instead of into Russia, it really draws into question, was this strategic target really worth it for the Russians? It provides nothing of value to the Russians logistically, and the only thing they may have done is cut off the Ukrainians from a railhead that was incredibly close to the front, but at the same time, they have railheads to fall back on at Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, so how much of an advance or a strategic win was that? And the answer is I don't really believe a lot, because there's just the density of rail yards in this one area is so large that taking one of them just doesn't really count. You would really have to capture all of them at the same time to really cause a massive hindrance in supplies. So with that in mind, we can actually see that the Ukrainians are making sure that the Russians know that they are not pleased with this minor inconvenience, as they are firing MLRSs once again in the direction of Lyman, as we can see here in this video. It's going to take it a second to load. Of course, Reddit's always a little bit questionable with the videos, so let's see if it'll load. There we go. And so here's the video. Of course, we can unmute this one. Pretty nice. And we can see that little soldier having fun with the MLRS firing. You can actually see that he matched his hand movements to the firing, which was pretty funny. So let's take a look at that again. I like that. That was pretty funny. And of course, it shows that the morale is pretty decent, considering that they're still joking around. Of course, they could be dreadful looking and absolutely depressed, like we see some Russian soldiers. But in every video we see, the Ukrainian spirits are still high. And so, defensive positions have been set up outside of Lyman. Of course, I won't say where, but they are pretty strong. We do know that the terrain around Lyman does facilitate an advantage to the defending force, and so I'm not going to add anything to it, but I do believe that the Ukrainians will keep a foothold on the other side of the Severodonetsk River for a while. We're now going to move further down the front towards the area of Biloorivka, where we can see that the 54th has hit some Russian units on the other side of the Severodonetsk River. Of course, I have to mute it. It does have copyrighted music. But we can see in this video that they are slamming down artillery onto Russian units just like it was any other day. We can, of course, see the artillery pouring down on the Russian units, which are trying to hide in between these destroyed houses. But we can see that that is to no avail, as the Ukrainians still hit them in between the houses. We can see one of the vehicles now brewing up, as it has a small fire. That fire is around the size, well, that one's not, but the fire that we saw a second ago is around the perfect size for a campfire. But now we can see that it's starting to heat up a little too much. So I would assume that this would be for a bonfire at large. We can also see a BMP or a BMD, I can't really tell which it is, but it's sitting here on the right side of the road, and we can now see a Tiger armored car or a UAZ moving down the road, trying to go to this area. We can now see artillery fire landing in front of it, and now, actually no, I think that's a civilian vehicle that the Russians are using. We can now see it took a left turn, and now an artillery shell landed in front of it to the right of the screen, and now it seems that that car is completely stopped. And then it looks like it completely stopped for good, and I think the Russians inside the car have stopped living. It looks like that artillery hit was dead on, and so I don't think that was a fun day for the Russians in that car. We now see the Ukrainians shelling what appears to be a hippie van that the Russians are also using. No, it's an R-100. We can see them shelling an R-100, and they hit it dead on and destroyed it. The Ukrainian artillery never ceases to impress. And in this video, we can see that they are still setting the mark high for accuracy with the artillery. But you now see that the Scooby-Doo van is burning up completely, and it's great to see that Ukrainian artillery is still managing to inflict large losses on the Russians, even as the Russians don't really have any more objectives to push over here, because they'll have to cross the river, and that's nearly impossible at this point. We're now going to move on into the area of Rubizhne, where today we've gotten a video of fighting in the outskirts of the city. What's very interesting is that Operator Starsky's unit is actually fighting in Rubizhne. And one thing I would like to make clear, because whenever I say that, I do worry some people, thinking that Starsky may be within the line of danger. Operator Starsky is actually in Kyiv. Most press officers, while assigned to a unit, don't always travel with them everywhere. And so he's actually in Kyiv in pretty good safety. And I, of course, wish Operator Starsky the best of luck. Him and me have become fairly good friends. And, of course, we do great work on the Sunday fundraisers, which I'm always happy about. And also, he's become a huge fan of them as well, just letting y'all know. And so here's a video of the Russians and the Ukrainians fighting on the outskirts of Rubizhne. Here we can see what we can assume to be, I can't really tell, but I'm assuming it's a Ukrainian soldier, although we can't really tell off of an armband. I don't see any on him. Also, just for some of the new people to know, we gave Operator Starsky the honorary title of Enforcer Starsky because a lot of viewers wanted that, so he's actually Operator slash Enforcer Starsky at this point. But here we can see two soldiers crawling around in the rubble outside of this house and looking down the street and trying to assess the situation. We can now see the soldier up front now running back through the rubble, back to his friend kind of near a picnic bench, and we can now see 3 of them moving into a house. Really more of an apartment block, I guess you could say. They've now gone inside the houses, and we can now see Russian, okay, that was obviously, definitely now Ukrainian soldiers that went into that building, because now we can see two BMP-2s, no, correction, 3 BMP-1s, and what appears to be a T-80 or a T-64. We now see them firing at the building the Ukrainians are in. Of course, we're not really sure if they're hitting the Ukrainians. It looked like they went into the further back part of the building, and they are hitting the front side of the building facing towards them. We now see them hitting all the buildings with general abandon, I guess would be the best term to describe this, as it appears that their firing is completely random and they're just trying to hit anything. And now it appears that the tank has shot the building dead on, most likely with a high explosive round, causing, once again, a large amount of damage to the front side of the building, but not the back side where we saw the Ukrainians. We now see the tank fire another shot, this time into the middle of the crossroads there. And something else important to note here, which is something I should point out because it's very important, is that a lot of people may be thinking, like, you know, here in the West and most Western European countries, almost every road's paved. There's hardly any dirt roads left. But here in Ukraine, you can still see, like, for example, through the middle of these apartment blocks, you can still see that there are dirt roads. And so whenever I'm talking about dirt roads, that's always something you do have to put into consideration in Ukraine and Russia, is that there's still a decent amount of unpaved roads. And so logistics vehicles can get bogged down in the mud if there's rain. And of course, they do have to move at a slower speed because, you know, obviously dirt roads are not conducive for higher speed travel. And so that'll slow down the rate that supplies can travel at. Anyways, I'm taking an aside on logistics. I need to stop doing that. Here's the rest of the video. I'm not really sure where the Ukrainian forces have gone yet, but we can still see that the Russians are trying to plaster that building and have destroyed a pretty decent bit of it, as we can see that nearly the entire front side of the building is now collapsed. We can now see another explosion reverberating onto another building. And we can see that there's a group of 2 BMP-1s, now 3 BMP-1s further down the road, a BMP-1 there, and then some kind of T-64 up at the front. Of course, exposing its weakened side to the Ukrainian defenders. And so, if a Ukrainian soldier was, say, over here, near this apartment building, and he had an anti-tank weapon, like an in-law, he could, of course, fire that directly into the side of the tank and destroy it. Although, as we've seen, it doesn't really matter what side of the tank is facing the Ukrainians. Most anti-tank weapons the Ukrainians use puncture through any part of it. And so, I guess that's kind of a null and void point, because we've seen Russian vehicles get destroyed from every single direction. Once again, we don't know the condition of the Ukrainian defenders in that building. We know that the explosions and damage hasn't reached the backside where they entered, but at the same time, it is destroying a large amount of the front side of the building. You can now see the Russians once again firing multiple times into the building. It looks like they're trying to go with the strategy of literally firing until the building collapses. And this, of course, remember, is a video made by the Russians, and they are literally showing themselves triumphantly obliterating a building with tank rounds and rounds from BMPs until only half of it is left standing. I don't really think that's something to be proud about. It's really showing how much the Russians can butcher something to just try and kill a few soldiers in their minds. So that's something crazy to me, because the United States would rarely show something like this, like a tank literally just firing into a building over and over, just trying to destroy the thing. Usually they would drop a 2,000-pound JDAM on the building and just level the entire thing, and that's only if they could confirm that there were no civilians in it, or they would clear the building with the infantry, one or the other. But we can see the Russians, of course, being the sloppy butchers they normally are. Moving further back behind the lines real quick, we can actually see that the Ukrainians once again are using more MLRSs and firing them at the Russians. And there's a good point to show, once I show both of these videos of artillery operating behind the lines, that I'm about to make here on these videos. So I'm going to let them play.
Смерть ворогам і слава Україні. За Азовсталь, за Маріуполь, за всі міста України, за всіх дітей України і за всіх пацанів. Слава Україні!
And that's the end of that video. And now we're going to quickly move to the next one, where we can also see more artillery operating in this area. But we can actually see the Ukrainian soldier who's firing it, styling on the enemy. For some of my older viewers, just for y'all to know a little bit of the lingo, because this is a little bit new to me, but styling on them is like doing some kind of a motif or some kind of a move, you know, to pretty much add that extra level, I guess you could say, of arrogance or confidence, whichever way you'd like to look at it, to show that you're well within control of the situation, I guess you could say. That's kind of like my best way of talking about what styling on them means, just in case some people don't know what the phrase is. But here we can see this Ukrainian soldier walking up to what appears to be a D-20 or a D-30. Let me see what the caption says. D-20. All right, I got it right the first time. And we can see him turn around and style on the Russians before he fires the piece. See him right there, styling on him. Of course, I can't play the music that's going with this because it's copyrighted. And he fires the piece. Hopefully directly onto a Russian tank or Russian infantry. And so these two videos go to an important point. Artillery is one of the most supply-consuming things you could ever imagine on a front line, by far. It takes a massive amount of effort to supply an MLRS with its unguided rockets, and also the artillery with their shells. They're incredibly heavy, and so you can't ever load up a truck to its, I guess, maximum carrying capacity in terms of space. You can only do it in terms of weight. And so we know for sure that Ukrainian logistics in this area, although we are thinking in our heads that they're threatened, are still operating incredibly well, because we can still see that the artillery is being used overtime at this point, and they still have enough ammunition to keep doing that. And so that's good proof that while the Russians have gotten very close to the T-1302 highway, that does not stop the Ukrainians from supplying their forces further up. So we're now going to hop further out and into the area surrounding Severodonetsk, where we can actually see that Russian artillery is also at work to a large degree today. From our reports that we've been able to hear, the Russians are bombarding Severodonetsk with everything they have, literally day and night, trying to level the city in an attempt to make it easier to push through.
Также по команде.
Команда.
So that's the end of the video, and one thing I would like to note is that this Malka or Peon or whatever kind of artillery piece this is, I get them all confused. They look the same to me, honestly, but well, at least the Peon and the Malka, they look the same. But still, we could see here in this clip that you could tell the way the camera was lined up. This piece was supposed to fire first, but apparently it had a fault while firing and the piece did not fire, and so the second one had to fire, and you can tell they tried to play that off in the film, but then you could tell that the other piece then fired another round afterwards, and you could tell that this one was having major issues, which may be showing you a lack of training or a lack of maintenance on this piece. And you see it fires once, this piece does not fire, and then this one fires again. And they try and play it off in the footage, but you can clearly see that that other artillery piece had a problem. And this is literally the best footage that the Russian propagandists can get to show off how their forces are operating. And that's not good news for them. If literally one of the best bits of film they can find still is showing the Russian units having defects in either firing the piece or maintaining it. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news further down towards Severodonetsk itself, where we can see some pictures of the Russian Terminators on the front line. They have made it. They are here. We can see what appears to be 3 T-72B3s and BMPT Terminators on both sides. Apparently, they were hit with artillery in these pictures, as you can see the explosions here, but they did manage to survive because for one of the few times, the Ukrainian artillery landed near the tanks, but not dead onto them. With T-72s and tanks of this kind, they are heavily armored enough that an artillery shell can explode very close to them and they won't be damaged to any sort of serious degree, but if the shell was to land directly on top of them, it would destroy the tank. The BMPT Terminators are also not invincible. One does have to remember that they literally share most of the same parts that a T-72B3 has, and we've seen hundreds of those get destroyed over the course of this war. So it's just a matter of time before we see a burning husk of a BMPT. You know, it's not like it's an impossible thing to do. It's not like this thing is actually scary. The only thing scary about it is the name. So, very interesting to see, and it's also very odd to me to see that the Russians still have not learned, and they're still bunching up their tanks like this. Still, it's insane. There's no other way to explain it. They must be stupid. So with that, we're now going to move on into Severodonetsk itself, where today we've seen that Chechens have entered the Mir Hotel, which is one of the landmarks of the city, which you can see right here. And so here's the video of Chechens fighting inside the Mir Hotel, which does let us know that the fight has been taken directly to the outskirts of Severodonetsk city. Here's the video. Hopefully those Chechens are kept exactly where they are. We do know the Ukrainian defenders are fighting tirelessly to defend the city, and they have been doing an incredibly good job because over the past actually really a month nearly at this point, of this renewed offensive by the Russians in the south, the Ukrainians have held the city of Severodonetsk and have been fighting in its outskirts for quite some while. With that, we're now going to move further out into the woods, where we can once again see more fights occurring in between the Ukrainian forces and the Russians. This is from a helmet cam on one of those soldiers. Here we can see the soldier reloading his AK. It has a foregrip on it. Did y'all see that? I haven't seen foregrips much during this war, but look, it's got an actual foregrip. Like one of the ones you would see on an M4 or an AR-15 or something. That is really nice. Sadly, he doesn't have an optic. Of course, everyone can't get one. But now we can see him laying down fire into the distance through the grass. Unfortunately, we can't see what he's firing at, but we do have a great idea that he is hopefully shooting at the Russians. We can see one of his friends in front of him there also firing into the distance at what may be Russian forces. We can now see him getting up along with his friend, and it appears that they are now hightailing it out of there to try and get to a better position. So with that is the end of the video, and it looks like it was a high-pitched firefight for sure, and hopefully the Ukrainian forces are having the upper hand there, although the Russians are literally throwing everything they have left into the small offensive around Severodonetsk, which may be putting the Ukrainians in a difficult situation. Now we see a video of more Russian Su-25s spotted near Severodonetsk. The Russian Air Force has hardly been operating throughout the course of this war, and this gives us verified proof with the amount of aerial footage that we've gotten of Russian aircraft operating around this area, that they are literally throwing everything they have into the small little offensive. There we can see one flying at treetop level in the distance. And with that, we can then immediately see the Ukrainians respond in kind with their own Su-25s flying out towards the Russians and attacking them. Hopefully this video will load pretty soon. Sometimes it takes a while. Oh, come on. I don't know why Reddit does that sometimes. Sorry about that, y'all. It's a little annoying to me as well. But here's the video. And these are Ukrainian Su-25s. And just look at them go. And so, we can see, of course, that the Ukrainian Air Force is still kicking. And we've got news later on. I want everyone to stick around for this because I'm telling y'all, we're of course going to go through a question segment here in a bit, and we do lose people when we go through those. But I'm telling y'all, if y'all are some of those people who come and leave during the question segment, stay through it and wait for me to get to that Southern Front news, because we have an insane story today. We're still waiting for video evidence to come out, but this has been confirmed by the Ministry of Defense. So all we're waiting for is video evidence to back it up. But it's an insane story, so hang out around for that. But we still got a lot of Severodonetsk news to cover here before we get to the question segment. Moving further on down the front, I'm saving this little marker here for last because it's actually from the governor of Luhansk, and he literally gives a rundown of the entire situation as per what the Ukrainian government is seeing. And so one of our last bits of frontline news is that we've seen some pushback by the Ukrainian soldiers further south of the front on this highway. Here we can see the Ukrainian soldiers laying down the fire on this side rail. I think it's called a cat guard. I remember hearing a story about why they're called that, but correct me if I'm wrong. Anyways, here's the video. And so with that, we've now reached the end of the combat news in this area, and kind of like how we do the speeches from President Zelensky, we got a speech from the Luhansk Governor today with a text-to-speech translation at the bottom that actually gives us a rundown of what they're seeing on the front lines right now. And so, here's a report from the Governor of Luhansk. Hopefully y'all can see that speech-to-text translation. I'm going to let it play, and if y'all can't, I'll just replay it and then speak it over.
Місто Северодонецьк, на жаль, російська армія знищує повністю. Вони обстрілюють цілодобово місто. До речі, достатньо хаотично. Їм немає різниці, куди потрапляють їх ракети, авіабомби чи снаряди. Вони просто знищують всю інфраструктуру, всі будинки. Що б не було за цим будинком, чи це будинок житловий, чи це приміщення школи, чи садочку, чи лікарня, все знищується повністю. Обстріли не зупиняються. Сьогодні рашистські ЗМІ розповсюджують інформацію про те, що місто повністю відрізано, воно повністю в оточенні, але це не відповідає дійсності, не відрізано місто і воно не в оточенні. Бої тривають. Російська армія, представники там певні частини зайшли все ж таки на околицю міста в готель Мир. Вони контролюють цей готель, цю територію і поруч автовокзал. Але далі просунутись не можуть. Ну, можу сказати, що досі тривають важкі бої якраз вже в місті.
And with that, that is a report from the governor of Luhansk himself. And we can hear from his own statement that the city of Luhansk and Severodonetsk has not been cut off in any way from the rest of the Ukrainian lines, and they are under heavy fire, and the Chechens have in fact reached the Mir Hotel. I did see some people in the live chat saying that they were actually pushed out of the Mir Hotel later on today, but unfortunately I didn't get any news on my end to confirm that. And so, with that, we have now covered one of the only areas on, well, actually the only area on the front line where the Russians are actually conducting offensive activity. And so with that, we're now about to move down to the Southern Front news, the international news, and finally the speech from President Zelensky, and also that huge news I was talking about just a second ago that happened right outside of Kherson, which is major, and I highly suggest y'all stay around for it, because it's going to remind y'all and give y'all a lot of nostalgia of some of the stories we heard coming out of this war in the first week. And so with that, we're now going to move on into the question segment, answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to move down into the Donbass area and the rest of the news. And so with that, what do we've got, Matthew?
Okay, and first up from the Super Chats, we have a $25 donation from Bill Vanderpool, who says, "Thank you for your dedication in getting this information out and keeping us informed. Keep up the good work."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. It does help us out a lot, and I am glad that a lot of people do appreciate it. And I'm more than grateful that enough people appreciate it to make sure that we can keep it running. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy what we do. Hopefully, we can start also expanding out later on to more things than the Ukraine war, because I would love to cover all kinds of news, honestly, and all kinds of things, really, not even just news per se, just like general information and such things like that. And so, of course, I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Robert Harrington, who says, "Has the U.S. offered treatment for Ukrainian war veterans in U.S. hospitals? The U.S. has some of the best treatment for war vets."
Thank you very much for the support. Sadly, I have not heard anything about that. I believe that the treatment that the Ukrainian soldiers are receiving is largely coming from nonprofit organizations that may be U.S. based, but they are operating within Ukraine. For example, the American Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, Revive Soldiers of Ukraine. We've run nonprofits for actually all 3 of those organizations, and I believe that's the closest that American medical organizations get to providing aid for Ukrainian soldiers, and they're actually over there providing the support. And I'm so happy, literally, that every single one of those organizations we have supported. And so there's no way for us to go, man, I wish, they could get more help. We've given them as much help as we can all together. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on into the rest of the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And up last, we have a $20 donation from Fat Wong 36, who says, "Can we get some leaf springs in the chat?"
Yes, can we get some Leaf Springs in the chat? Type Leaf Springs in the chat if you are a member of the Leaf Spring Army and you love this channel, the community we have, and also the news delivered. Also, if you would like to support the Leaf Spring Army and help it grow, make sure to slam that like button, because that helps us to reach more people, which brings more members into the Leaf Spring Army, and more people hear this news, and more people, of course, can help out with the Sunday fundraisers. Also, another thing that we're still working on is getting some recognition for all of the fundraising that we've done and the channel has done as a whole, because I went on to Reddit today to look for news, and that's one of the places I find some of my news is on Reddit, and I saw that it made the front page of Reddit that a fundraiser had managed to raise $8,000 for tourniquets and other medical aid. And honestly, I was like, what? I was like, how come my viewers haven't gotten the recognition they deserve for raising $276,000? And I was absolutely flabbergasted. So I'm going to make sure to put it out there of all the great names of all of our supporters who have put in money into those Sunday night fundraisers and have helped us to reach untold goals that most people can't even dream of when they start off on a fundraiser. And so with that, I thank you all so much for the support. If you have sent in a super chat, do not worry. We will get to all of them by the end of the night, and we will also answer some questions from the live chat as well. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the rest of the news from around the country. Starting off in Avdiivka. Today we've seen that the pro-Russian forces have been hitting Avdiivka incredibly hard. Here we can see an ATGM hitting a Ukrainian trench near Avdiivka, but the quick thinking of the soldier saved his life. Check out the video. Here we can see those soldiers sitting there, and we can hear an ATGM come in, and they both ducked just in time for the missile to skirt over their trench, and both of them to come out of it okay. You can see both of them hop up out of the trench right there, and they're like, wow, that was close. An incredible thing that they survived. Their reflexes were so fast. Honestly, it's a miracle that they survived, and it's great to know they did too. We know that if any of them were wounded, it was slightly, because they both just literally stood up like, wow, that's crazy. And so with that, it's great to see that the Russians did miss them. And we're now going to move on to the next video, where we can see Russian artillery hitting Avdiivka again today. Here's the video. Here we can see what appears to be an interchange, and we can see some vehicles moving in the distance near a charred field. It looks like they're going off-road a little bit. I don't see any road where they're at. We can now see them appearing to get onto the highway. And then they crossed it, and they're now going off-road again. It's very interesting to me because they're actually going kind of fast off-road. Of course, these vehicles are most likely made to travel off-road, but at the same time, it's very weird when I'm always thinking about logistics trucks and how poorly they handle off-road situations to see some armored cars just zipping across an open field. We now see them getting close to what appears to be an abandoned warehouse of a sort, and they've now taken a turn, and they're heading towards this small structure over here on this side of the video. Well, you can now see the Russian artillery coming in, and the first shot was way off. I don't know if they're going to correct that shot yet, but that first shot was way off. I mean, like, the Ukrainians heard that, and they're like, huh, did something hit near us? Because that was not even close. We can now see the drone operator taking a look and being like, I kind of expected that from the Russian artillery, considering that they only have about 3 weeks training at best. We can still see the smoke from the first shot, and I think the second shot's going to be coming in soon. We can now, of course, see the Russian drone operator just staring at the camera and wondering why he's in the army. We can now see a second round hit. This time it's getting a little bit closer to the Ukrainians, but still well off. We can now see the drone operator once again staring at the camera, and now he's realizing why he has a crippling addiction to alcohol is because he can't bear to live with the fact that the Russian army is this bad. We can now see the next shot literally land off the mark again, almost in the same spot where the first shot landed. He's now contemplating picking up the Smirnoff bottle he has right beside him. And we can now see him zooming in the camera as he can't believe the inaccuracy of the fire he's seeing. They are still falling off the mark as the Ukrainians are about 100 yards to the right of where all this artillery fire is landing. He keeps on zooming in and zooming out because he's having to, like, refocus his vision and wonder why the rounds are falling off mark every single time. He's thinking, I've literally given them the input of where to adjust, and they're still hitting in the exact same spot. As we can see his nose right here on the left side of the camera, we can now tell that he is rethinking his life choices and wondering why he was born a Russian and why he has to live through the disgrace of watching the artillery not able to correct its fire and continuously landing the shots in the exact same spot, which is still 100 yards off. We can now see him pointing out, and he's probably raging, much like a Call of Duty gamer, and saying, what the hell, why can't they adjust the fire? I've literally told them 5 times now to adjust to the right, and they're still hitting the same warehouse. We can now see the camera zooming in itself as the cameraman is trying to show in disbelief how bad the Russian artillery really is. We can now see them looking at the same warehouse, which does appear to be smoking at this point, while they've once again created no kind of progress on actually hitting these Ukrainian forces, because they are still just 100 yards to the right, and they've missed them with every shot. We can now see them bringing the drone back in after an unsuccessful barrage, and just wondering what's the point of even using the drone if the Russian artillerists are not going to adjust their fire based off of the information they're getting. We'll probably never get an answer to that question, and they certainly won't get an answer to that question. And so with that, we're now going to move on to out of Avdiivka, because that's all the news we have from there today, and we're now going to take a look at some news that's occurred near Pisky, where the Russians fired an MLRS barrage short and hit their own village on their own side of the border. Let's take a look at this video and let's listen to the absolute freakout that this poor Donetsk civilian is having to go through, as the Russians are so incompetent they're literally barraging a city within their own borders, pretty much.
Вон она, ля. Ебать! Отойди! Блядь! Маш, подожди! Эй, блядь! Сука! Блядь, детей, Маша! Маша, быстрей! Блядь, ну куда? Ёбаный в рот! Сука! Пиздец, Маша!
Тихо. Не думай, Женя, ты им так ничего.
А ты... Блядь! Держи телефон!
Now, something insane to me is, just like we saw the last video with the drone operator watching the artillery fall off mark, there's probably another drone operator out there that's guiding in this fire for the MLRS, and he's watching drone footage and not seeing any explosions. Meanwhile, the rockets are landing about a mile or two behind where the drone is on a village that's within Russian-controlled territory. I mean, this you can't literally make this kind of stuff up, and this has to be harrowing for these civilians, because they're thinking, well, we're not really on the front lines anymore, and the Ukrainians certainly aren't going to fire into a populated village and kill us, and then they're literally getting fired on by the Russians, which have taken that village. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I'm going to let the video continue and let y'all see it. And we now see him getting up off of the ground, and although this is most likely wounded or killed civilians, this man is literally thinking, what in the hell is happening? Because you can't make up this kind of incompetence. They're literally not only killing Ukrainian civilians, they're killing DPR and LPR citizens now too. You can't make it up, literally. It's insane, honestly. And so with that, we're now going to move to the last bit of news we've gotten from the Donetsk area, where we can see the front lines in the distance from this film and the explosions that are occurring out there in the distance miles away. So here's the video. This was just about 2 or 3 hours ago. that's the end of the video. It then repeats, and it's insane to me to think that the Russians are levying that kind of firepower against the Ukrainians, and they still manage to make no progress whatsoever. Of course, we know that the Russians haven't been conducting any kind of offensive activities here. This may just be to, in their minds, soften the Ukrainians up, but we know that even when they are pushing offensives, it's still incredibly difficult for them, even levying that kind of artillery fire against the Ukrainians nightly and daily, literally non-stop 24/7. So with that, we're now going to move further down and into Mariupol, where today we've gotten some additional news out of the city. Here we can see the life of a Mariupol citizen through their own eyes, as this man is wandering around a street in the ruined and nearly abandoned city of Mariupol. I also have to warn you all in advance that there will be a human arm that is heavily disfigured, and you can't really tell it's a human arm, but it will be shown at the end of the video as a dog is carrying it off. So if you are a little squeamish to that sort of stuff, I highly suggest that you click off the video and come back. But it's something that you really can't tell until the commentator recording this video observes that for himself. So here's the video.
Владимирская улица. Люди, ау. О, собака что-то тащит. Твою мать, это человеческая рука была.
And it's honestly sickening to believe that the Russians have caused that much carnage and so many deaths, that this dog has picked up a random arm of a dead person and is carrying it around the city, and no one knows where that body is, where that dog got that arm off of. And there's just so many bodies that no one can even bother to actually care where that came from. And that lets you know the level of carnage and destruction that's been wrought by the Russians on the city. That there are so many bodies that an occurrence like that is slightly perturbing to the cameraman, but nothing to really shock him all too much. It sounded like he'd seen this before, and he saw it again, and he was like, wow, it's another human arm. And it's sick to think that the Russians have killed that many people. That's just the thing now in Mariupol. So hopefully the sick Russians that did these kinds of things to these civilians will be held accountable, and will hopefully face Ukrainian infantry on the front, a javelin, a Stugna, or a court. Whatever it may be, I hope that they get some swift justice incredibly soon. With that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of video that we have from Mariupol. I'm not really sure if this occurred today or if this is a montage of video footage we have not seen before, but I can confirm that I have not seen any of this footage before here on this channel, and so I'm going to show it to y'all because it shows the Russians fighting near the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. We can now see them fighting on the outskirts, and we can now see what they are claiming to be Ukrainian prisoners. We know that thousands of them surrendered on, I believe, day 80 something. I'm not really sure. I forgot now. It was May 17th. I do remember that. We can now see the soldiers firing down the street with a tank supporting them from the front. We now see them throwing a Ukrainian flag into a barrel fire and not really being met with any success, honestly. It looks like they were failing at that, like they've been failing with the entire invasion. We can now see a montage of vehicles attacking the Azovstal steel plant. And this definitely doesn't look like footage that was taken recently. The weather is entirely different, and it looks like early spring weather, honestly. So this may have been something that occurred during March or April. Now we see more footage of them moving around the village streets. Well, actually, the city street, honestly. We can now see them inside of a building that appeared to be largely destroyed. We now see a tank firing into the distance, another T-72B3 firing into the Azovstal. At incredibly close range, we can now see the same tank firing into the distance again and again. We can now see them capturing what may be Ukrainian and trying to show off tattoos that show something. We can now see them firing an anti-tank weapon, an AGS. Now they're inside of some kind of a garage. Now some explosion occurred nearby to them. Apparently it was a Russian firing an RPG of a sort. We now see them firing down into the Azovstal plant. And it's interesting to me because we actually haven't seen really much of this news, well, much of these videos before. And so it looks like the Russians are allowing out a large amount of videos from the Mariupol area that weren't out before. It also looks like the general ban on phones and, well, the general creation of videos is not really enforced in the Russian units much, because we're seeing a large amount of video evidence come out after the fact showing what's been going on in Mariupol, and also across the rest of the front where action is no longer occurring. Of course, I'm sorry, everyone, once again, I just saw someone say silent movie in the chat. I hate that it is silent, but one thing is that it has copyrighted music. And so, unfortunately, I can't play the music or else YouTube's going to come down here and break my knees. Well, you now see a Russian walking around with a stick of stuff. It looks like he's stolen some kind of food, and he's, like, wrapped it with a saran wrap around a wooden stick, and now it looks like they're repeating some of the footage at the end. And with that, that is the end of the video. And we once again got better insight to what the siege of the Azovstal looks like over the past 2 months. With that, we're now going to move further down the front, and we're now going to move to the area south of Zaporizhia on the front lines, as the 45th Brigade has destroyed more Russian units today. Once again, we don't see the Russian units committing to any kind of offensives here in this area, but the Ukrainians do not care. They are going to wipe them out anyways. But you now see here on this video, they are highlighting where the Russian units are. Here we can see it says Orkiv. Down here it also says Kamaz, and then we can see Logovo. Am I reading that right? I'm not really sure, but we do know that this one is a Kamaz truck over here. We now see the first shell, literally the first shot, land dead onto the Kamaz. We can now see the third shot landing dead onto the other vehicle. The third shot landing, once again, dead onto the other vehicle. We can now see the other Kamaz highlighted again. And it looks like it wasn't lucky either, because it's been knocked out as well. We now see them pointing out what appeared to be what they were calling a technical. We can now see the fifth shot landing behind some kind of a small storage unit. Wait a minute. Nope, this is actually different footage. I was about to say, is this the same footage we saw earlier? Now we can see some Russians getting out of this car that they've commandeered and wandering around. We can now see the sixth shot hit the warehouse behind them. And now they appear to have tried to run into this white house. The Ukrainians are still hitting that warehouse behind them, which may have Russian vehicles in it, and may be the reason why they're blowing it away. Now we can see them hitting the car they came there in, and so they have no way out, and we can now see them bombarding the general area where those soldiers may be. We can now see that there was another Kamaz in the tree lines nearby, and it looks like the Ukrainians won't be letting it out alive either, as they hit that one too. And now the Russians have no way out. They are now stuck there. We now see them double tapping the Kamaz. Looks like they learned the lesson from the double tap that the Predator drones used in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we can now see the carnage just left over. Destroyed Russian vehicles. That was kind of weird. Didn't that look like ghoulish faces that they showed right there? Right here? Oh, they're orcs! They put orcs on the video. from the 45th Brigade. They literally edited in orcs from like Lord of the Rings or something into the video. I was like, wow, that looks eerie, and those are orcs. We can now see the 13th shell landing right on the vehicle that they were pointing out, and also there's apparently infantry inside of that house as well. And we can now see them editing in another orc face. Is it? Oh my god! I just realized they put a little orc head over that because it was a Russian soldier. You see, the Russian soldier is right below the little orc head right there, and it looks like the Ukrainians weren't going to let him out either, because while watching someone get obliterated isn't really a laughing matter, the fact that they pasted a little orc head above him with a Z, and then they smacked him dead on with an artillery shell just to get that one guy out of spite, it's a little comical in a morbid way. But here's the video. Oh my god. They did that man dirty. Oh my lord. And so with that is the end of the video. We could literally see the Ukrainians labeling them as orcs. I can't believe, honestly, I haven't seen that before in a video. That's the first time, and they got really creative at the end when they misted the guy who was running out of the house. And so with that, we're now going to move further down the front, and we're going to go to the city of Melitopol, where we've seen the Russians raise the flag over the city. Isn't it beautiful? I'm not talking about the flag. I'm actually talking about the barbed wire that they've had to put around the flagpole to make sure no one climbs up it and rips the Russian flag down. That's beautiful, because that lets you know that they are so scared of Ukrainian resistance because none of the Ukrainians are still buying Russian occupation that they've literally had to coat the entire bottom part of the flagpole with barbed wire to keep a Ukrainian from going up there and destroying the Russian flag. I love it, honestly. It lets you know that the Ukrainians are still not buying any of this, and there's resistance at every level, including within the occupied territories. So wonderful to see that this had to be coated with a barbed wire, but still, it's a little bit aggravating to see the Russian flags being raised. Hopefully the Ukrainians will be able to take that thing down somehow, and with that, we're now going to move further down the front, and we're now going to move to the news. We are just 2 bits of news away from the news I've been hyping up all night. It's insane news, and we're just waiting for some video verification to add the cherry on top in a way to verify the news. Starting off in the city of Kherson, we can also see some slight resistance, at least from the civilians in a way. Also, everyone, take a good laugh at Naked XYZ. That's a pretty funny one. I haven't seen that bot before, but we just got rid of him. But here we can see a Ukrainian playing an anthem, the anthem of Ukraine, on his guitar, and passerbys are dropping money into his case like it's going out of style. So let's check this out. Wonderful to see that this Ukrainian is putting up resistance of his own kind, and that's through music and, of course, playing the anthem of the country that the Russian soldiers are at war with. Hopefully he doesn't get in any trouble for this, and it's just a sign of resistance and a show of solidarity that all Ukrainians, even within occupied territory, still do not buy the Russian invasion and hate the Russian invaders. With that, we're now going to move on to the news that everyone's been waiting for all night. Some of you may remember that within the first week of the war, there was a legend that started to circle the internet and pass through pretty much every single Ukrainian circle that was out there. The man was a pilot. No one knew his name, no one knew what he looked like, but he flew a MiG-29, and they said that he had shot down multiple aircraft at the start of that war, and that he was the first ace in the modern age. Sadly, as time came to pass, the Ukrainians came out and they said that that story was a rumor made up by someone online. They never verified it, and the story wasn't true. And if anything, they were just saying that if they were to adopt that story, it would symbolically represent all of the pilots of Ukraine. And so, the story of this grand ace who flew a MiG-29 disappeared into oblivion, and along with it, the interest of the public in Ukraine's Air Force and their exploits in the air largely dissipated as well. But today we've gotten a story that reminds me of those first weeks of the war, where the Ghost of Kyiv was one of the main stories that came out of the country, and the amazing dogfights that he was supposed to have gotten into, of course, was circling around the entirety of the internet as everyone on Earth was trying to spot the Ghost of Kyiv. Today we've gotten news from the Ministry of Defense that there was a dogfight over Kherson in between a Ukrainian MiG-29 and a Russian Su-35, and the Ukrainian MiG-29 won and shot the Su-35 down. It is a story that reminds me of that very first week with the Ghost of Kyiv. Of course, it is not the Ghost of Kyiv who shot this Su-35 down. It was a real Ukrainian pilot who was managing to do the unbelievable. The MiG-29 is actually supposed to be outclassed by the Su-35. I believe the Su-35 was made as a replacement to the MiG-29 as a whole, yet this brave Ukrainian pilot, according to the Ministry of Defense here, actually managed to shoot down, outclass itself. Well, actually, no, I got that all messed up. The MiG-29 managed to shoot down an Su-35, although it was supposed to be outclassed against it. We're still waiting for confirmation on this story in terms of video evidence of the burning wreckage of this aircraft, but the story is incredible, and so we will be looking for that final bit of verification to see that this MiG-29 in fact has claimed a kill on one of Russia's finest aircraft, the Su-35. It's incredible news, and I hope it gives you all a little bit of chills, because that is literally reminiscent of the stories of the Ghost of Kyiv at the very start of this war. And so with that, we have now covered every bit of news in Ukraine except for one piece, and then we're going to move to the international news. Here in this video, we can actually see that the Russians apparently hit a army barracks, a National Guard barracks in Dnipro today with some kind of a cruise missile. So the video loops, but we can see that the Russians have attacked a barracks. Apparently there's 10 dead and 35 wounded. Oh, well, this guy said based on similar cases. What type of, whatever. That's stupid right there. Anyways, we don't know how many people have been killed and wounded in that attack, actually, and we'll have to wait for some more figures on that if we're able to get them. So with that, we're actually seeing a lot of reviews for some restaurants here in Dnipro, and maybe once this war is over, I'm going to travel over there and check the place out, and also give Operator Starsky an Enforcer shirt. Also, I just noticed, oh, wait a minute, that's a marker for something else. Let me get rid of that. So with that, we've now covered all the Ukraine news, and we're now going to go across the pond, as they say, to the United States and Canada. Now, one thing I did get told today when I showed this video, and it's going to be the first one we show, is that it's apparently from an earlier time. There is snowfall on the ground, and I did notice that, but apparently the Royal Canadian Air Force published that video today as pretty much a summary of the actions that they have committed today. According to the Royal Canadian Air Force, they have completed a shipment of M777 howitzers to Ukraine again. Here in this video, we can see the loading process of a C-17 that was most likely unloaded with M777s earlier on in the war during the early months, for example, February or March. We can now see them preparing the pieces for transport. I'm actually going to skip forward through this video a little bit because it's kind of the standard loading procedure that we've seen multiple times. We can now see the aircraft taxiing to the runway and taking off in what appears to be the morning hours of the day. And off it goes with a complete complement of M777s, once again to hopefully help out the Ukrainian cause and push the Russians back. With that, the M777, of course, is a wonderful piece to see, and it's always great to hear that the United States and all of its allies in NATO are always trying to send the best equipment to Ukraine. But the thing is that that isn't the best equipment that the United States has in its inventory. A lot of people have been asking, when is the United States going to send its MLRSs to Ukraine? That's a great question. And the answer is today. Today, the United States has confirmed that they will be sending M142 HIMARS to Ukraine for their support. Unfortunately, this has been removed Sadly, it was a repost, so they removed it. But still, we did get confirmation today that the M142 HIMARS, let me pull that up for y'all real quick. The M142, which is America's MLRS, which can fire hundreds of miles away instead of just around 50 miles, which is what the Uragan could do, which is Russia's best MLRS. This thing pretty much has unlimited range compared to the Russian MLRSs, and will definitely be a huge step up in Ukraine's, I guess you could say artillery capabilities. Great to hear, and it's something that a lot of people have been looking forward to for an incredibly long time. So, of course, it is wonderful to see. And with that, we are now going to return to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Zelensky. And so, without further ado, here's the speech from the President of Ukraine for today on day 93 of the war.
Незламні народи нашої найсміливішої країни, усі наші захисники і захисниці. Сьогодні хочу розпочати це звернення зі слів вдячності усім, хто працює в екстреній медичній допомозі. Сьогодні їхнє професійне свято. Це люди дійсно незламні, дійсно сміливі, дійсно віддані добрій справі. Навіть порахувати неможливо, скільки життів врятовано працівниками екстренки, якими б не були умови, якими б не був час. Вони завжди виконують свою роботу. Я вдячний кожному і кожній за дійсно швидку допомогу і реально самовіддану роботу. Вдячний за роботу у час пандемії. Вдячний, що зараз, у час повномасштабної війни, люди мають доступ до швидкої і у районах бойових дій. Вдячний за справжній героїзм, який проявляється всюди. Проявляють і фельдшери, і водії, та всі. На жаль, ця війна забрала із життя тих, хто робив все, щоб врятувати інших, вічна їм пам'ять. Сьогодні представники нашої держави, прем'єр-міністр, міністр охорони здоров'я вручили нагороди працівникам екстреної медичної допомоги. І це той мінімум, який держава може зробити, щоб відзначити те, що вони роблять. Але обов'язково буде і максимум. До цієї війни, до 24 лютого, ми робили все, щоб підняти забезпечення екстренки, її працівників на достойний рівень. І ми обов'язково продовжимо цю політику, коли дійдемо до миру для нашої країни. Провів сьогодні нараду з Кабінетом міністрів, заслухав доповіді широкого кола питань, очікую від урядовців більшої активності, зокрема і щодо подолання дефіциту пального, який утворився через російські удари по нафтопереробному заводу в Кременчузі і по нафтобазам в різних регіонах держави. І щодо забезпечення робочих місць для наших людей, і щодо інших важливих економічних питань. Продовжую збирати для нашої боротьби якнайширшу міжнародну підтримку. Сьогодні звертався до політичної і експертної спільноти Індонезії. Говорили про загрози, які Росія створила для кожної країни у світі зараз. Чого варта одна лише продовольча криза, коли через російську блокаду наших портів на ринку, очевидно, не вистачає продовольства. А отже, провокується зростання цін. А отже, провокується політичний хаос в тих країнах, які найбільше залежать від нашого експорту. Вдячний індонезійцям за розуміння аргументів нашої країни і підтримку в протистоянні таким кризам, які провокує Росія. Поспілкувався сьогодні зі студентами Стенфордського університету. Це один із провідних світових вишів. Було приємно побачити українських студенток, які там навчаються. Було приємно також і почути, наскільки щиро і повно американська студентська спільнота усвідомлює, що ми в Україні боремося за нашу спільну свободу, одну на всіх у світі. Запросив студентів Стенфорду по завершенню навчання приєднатися до реалізації проєкту відбудови України, бо це дійсно буде найбільший проєкт по захисту свободи для їхнього покоління. Говорив сьогодні з прем'єр-міністром Італії Маріо Драгі і про те, як не допустити подальшого розгортання продовольчої кризи, і про постачання пального в Україну. Ця тема є обов'язковою у всіх моїх контактах з європейськими партнерами, і про оборонну підтримку для нашої держави. Звичайно, детально обговорили ситуацію на полі бою, складну ситуацію на Донбасі. Як це передбачалося, дуже важка ситуація. Окупанти намагаються хоча б на 100 днів війни досягнути тих цілей, які сподівалися реалізувати вже за перші дні після 24-го. Тому вони зосередили на Донбасі максимум артилерії, максимум резервів, там і ракетні удари, і авіація, все. Захищаємо нашу землю так, як це дозволяє наявний на сьогодні оборонний ресурс. Робимо все для того, щоб посилити його, і ми посилимо. Якщо окупанти думають, що Лиман і Сєвєродонецьк будуть їхніми, то вони помиляються. Донбас буде українським, тому що це ми, це наша сутність. І навіть якщо Росія принесе туди всюди руйнацію і страждання, ми все одно відновимо кожне місто і кожну громаду. І там немає і не буде жодної реальної альтернативи нашим українським прапорам. Як і завжди, підписав сьогодні указ про нагородження наших військових державними нагородами відзначення 198 військовослужбовців Збройних сил України, 4 з них посмертно. А також 27 військовослужбовців Головного управління розвідки. Вічна слава усім, хто виборює нашу незалежність. Вічна пам'ять кожному і кожній, хто віддав своє життя за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Zelensky, and we're now going to move into the question segment and answer everyone's questions that have put in a super chat for tonight, and also answer a lot of questions from the live chat. In fact, we're going to do something slightly new tonight because I want to make sure that people who did send in a question in the live chat do get them answered. And so we're actually, Matthew, going to answer some of the live chat questions in between some of the super chats, but we will get to every super chat by the end of the night. And I'm also going to try and throw in some live chat questions in there in between, so that way we can, of course, answer multiple different kinds of questions. And so with that, we have now reached the end of the news. So if you are here for the news only, we have reached the end of that segment. If you did enjoy what you watched tonight, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Please make sure to subscribe, though, and hit that bell button, because we do run these streams every single day of the week, except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. And we also run Sunday night fundraisers, where we gain a whole bunch of support for Ukraine and a nonprofit that's working there. So once again, we're now going to move on into the questions. And so what do we got, Matthew?
And first up from the super chats, we have a $20 donation from John Boyer, who says, kudos to the enforcer and enforcer Matt for keeping up the great work. Bravo, President Zelensky, and Slava Ukraine.
And I thank you so much for the support, and also Slava Ukraine as well. But I do thank you very much for the support and enjoying what we do here on this channel. Of course, I put my heart and soul into this every day, every single day about... Oh man, let me think. 4 hours before the stream, I sit down and I start working on this stuff. And so what y'all see is about 4 hours of time that I put into compiling all of this news, creating a thumbnail, describing what happened on the stream, also putting stuff into the description, responding to comments. Actually, comments is an all-day ordeal. And then also I put like an additional hour into making the summaries in the middle of the day and doing everything associated with them as well. So I put a load of effort into this, and I'm so glad that a lot of people do appreciate the efforts I go through to make sure that this news is delivered. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you do appreciate what we do, and also Slava Zelensky as well, because that man is an incredible politician. And he's been nothing but a hero and a helper to his country, and a true patriot at that. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from the live chat from Jim Darby, who says, if Ukraine had a navy, do you think Russia would have still invaded?
I think they still would have. You see, Ukraine actually did have a navy, but it was incredibly small. Let me pull that up real quick. Ukrainian navy... Well, wait a minute. There it was. Active ships. They have 27 active ships. Their largest one, of course, was sunk in port at the very beginning of the war. They scuttled it. Come on, where is it now? So here's the surface fleet, at least from what they're going to tell us. They have one small landing craft, the L-434. They also have a decent amount of missile boats, patrol boats, small patrol gunboats. Of course, more gunboats, ribs. They have a couple of ribs. Everyone loves ribs. Usually I love mine with barbecue sauce. We can see some freight ships, diving support, all kinds of stuff. It looks like they've already stricken the frigate from the roster, it appears. Yes, they did. Actually, no. Wait, what? Well, anyways, it looks like they have a pretty small navy. So They did have a frigate at the start that they did scuttle in port, and I think it was the only one they managed to actually own. So yeah, I think if they had a navy, the Russians would have just tried to fight them at sea, or the Black Sea Fleet would have engaged them very far out in the Black Sea and tried to destroy them out there, because Ukraine's navy would have inevitably been much smaller than the Russians, even if they were able to have one. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $100 donation from Steve2848. Who says, thanks again for your continued reporting.
Well, I thank you so much, Steve. Of course, that kind of support helps out this channel a lot, and I can't thank you enough. You've done that like 4 times over the previous few days, and I've got to thank you so much, because that kind of support keeps the channel running, and so I thank you so much. It helps us out a load, and of course, without that kind of support, it's hard to keep the channel running. Of course, we're happy for all kinds of support. If anyone sends in the super chat, I'm always flipping over, just knowing that the channel will keep on running. But of course, massive super chats help us to keep on running a whole load. And so thank you once again, Steve, for the kind words and enjoying the reporting that we do. And without the support that people like you give, which is huge, we wouldn't be able to keep on doing it. So so give yourself a pat on the back for making sure that we can continue on delivering this news. And thank you so much once again for the support. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $28 donation from Anders Peterson, who says, cheers.
And I thank you so much for the support, Anders, and cheers as well. And with that being said, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from the live chat from T Truth, who says, does U.S. have troops on Poland / Belarus border?
Poland? Yes, I think they do. It's a decent amount. It's not anything large. It's not like invasion force size, but I do believe that they have several thousand there on the Polish-Belarusian border. But we don't really have a lot of information about that because, of course, that kind of goes beyond the scope of the Ukraine war, and that sort of going into international news is a pretty decent bit. But we do know that the Polish do keep a few thousand troops on the border. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And if we could, Matthew, let's answer a live chat question real quick.
And that actually was a live chat question.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I didn't catch on that. So I hope I answered that question pretty well, and I hope that people do like us answering live chat questions intermittently in between our super chats, because I was kind of thinking about it last night, and I was like, of course we're always going to recognize everyone's super chats, but at the same time, people who send in live chat questions sometimes feel like they're being ignored because either they're gone by the time we answer them, or it's so late in the stream, like they're half asleep and they don't notice it, one or the other. So I want to make sure that people do know that we do answer live chat questions as well. But once again, we are very appreciative for the support that everyone gives us to keep on going. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Private Lunchtime, who says, here's a little something to brew up some T90M coffee. May Putin's blood iron turn into artillery rust and his legacy resemble a Severodonetsk river crossing. Stay toasty and keep up the stellar work. Slava Ukraine.
Oh my gosh. Matthew, could you get that one printed out and put it in a frame? Because I think that was honestly hitting on every single thing that we've ever said on this channel. I thank you so much for the support, man. That was actually the best thing I've ever heard in terms of a quote. Well, not really a quote, more of like a toast, I guess you could say. That was incredible. Honestly, I was blown away the entire time. I was like, oh my god, he said toasty, he said Severodonetsk river crossing. I was like, he's hit on everything. So I thank you so much for the support, and also the cool little toast there. And like literally, Matthew, make sure to like send that one to me some way, like over email or something later on, because I actually want to remember that one so that way when this war ends, we can have a toast to that on stream. So with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up from the live chat, we have a question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, what would be the potential dangers of a humiliating Russian defeat in this war?
The potential dangers, there's really none. Usually when countries go through devastating defeats, much like the Soviet Union went through in the Winter War, they just try and brush it under the rug and forget the whole thing. Of course, it's not like the Russians would, lose and then they'd be like, I'm going to get you all, like in a movie, and then start nuking everyone. That kind of stuff doesn't really happen much. Of course, you always have to remember that when you get high enough into the government levels, like at the level of a president or a premier of a country, you're pretty much playing a large board game that involves everyone's lives on Earth, and you're trying to play the strategic game against other countries. And while that sounds very simplified, things in life are actually really simple, and that's literally all it boils down to is they're literally playing a board game up there. And so it wouldn't really be smart for the Russians to try and lash out and do something else because they're going to be at one of their weakest moments after this war in modern history. And so they're not really going to possess the ability in conventional war to push something else. And also in terms of nuclear war, that's literally going to be ending the game for them. And that's something that no one really wants to do. So I thank you so much for the support. And I hope that does answer the question in a way. Usually when a country gets defeated, they usually go into reclusion and they sit there and try and build everything back up for about the next decade or so. Unless if it was the Soviet Union's instance, which is right after they got defeated in Finland, then the Germans invaded them just about 2 years later. So with that, I thank you very much for the support once again. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
Okay, and up next, we have one from the super chats. We have a $20 super chat from Ben Wen, who says, and this is not a political question, just to be clear off the bat. When you hear this name, don't be concerned. Ben says, why is Biden so indecisive on sending the HIMARS and MLRS to Ukraine? We need Ukraine to win decisively to also indirectly send a message to China regarding Taiwan, as a Russian victory would only embolden China, in my opinion.
That's an incredibly good question. And of course, I don't really address the presidents by name. I just address, of course, the administration or the standing government is what I call them. And so unfortunately, I won't be able to address his name. But the current administration appears to be waffling on this issue. But the United States, not really surprisingly, it operates as a bureaucracy, and so while this may look like it's waffling at the top, this may be waffling within the Department of Defense itself as they're informing the sitting government as to whether it is possible or not possible, or whether it'll be breaching any kind of security, national security to send this MLRS over there. And so there may be some waffling down within the lower echelons of the government in the Pentagon where they're like, yes, we can send it over. No, we really can't. And that may be showing that there's a bit of a battle in between some of the top brass in the military, well, probably the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marine Corps, as to whether that should actually go over there or not. Because some may be saying, this is important, of course, looking at us playing a game. We have to win the game, and so by winning the game, we must make sure that Ukraine wins. But at the same time, someone may be saying, we've never sent these over to another country before. They are one of America's best artillery systems, and so sending that over there could, of course, be leading it to maybe get captured or destroyed, and then the Russians could start to get valuable information out of it. And so there may be some kind of argument like that going on within the military that's leading to this waffling at the very top of the command structure. Of course, we don't really know for sure, but I do agree that sending over weapon systems of that kind is vitally important to Ukraine's actual position in this war, and the faster we send them over there and the more we send over, they will be in a better position, obviously, sooner. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question there. Of course, I don't ever weigh in on politics. I don't ever want to say that any political party or administration is doing the right or wrong thing, because when you're actually playing the game, like the political game, as you could say, or the diplomatic game, or the strategic board game, I pretty much call it around the world, there really never is a right or wrong answer to any decision that the government makes. There's just either a decent amount of pros or cons to it, but by and large, everyone will still get by. There's very rarely a decision that actually leads to actual collapse or destruction. Most things actually run on autopilot, surprisingly, like the U.S. government. So with that, I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from the live chat from Kelly Meacham, who says, do you think that Putin will ever be tried for war crimes?
Ooh, that's a tough one, you see, because while they could, of course, try him in an international court, the question is, how will they enforce that? Because no international body like the United Nations has any kind of jurisdictional authority to then go into Russia and actually make sure that Putin is held accountable for his crimes. So while, of course, a court out there could say he's guilty of war crimes and sentence him, the question is, how are they actually going to enforce that sentencing? Because it's not like they can just go into Russia and the Russian police would back down and the military would back down and Putin's bodyguards would back down and they could just go in there and handcuff him and take him to some prison in, Germany or something. So I don't think he would actually be tried for war crimes, because just the ability of actually following through on the conviction would be next to impossible. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, let me recognize a $20 donation from Henrietta, Henrietta Langley. Henrietta, oh my God. I'm from Alabama, folks, so that just came out just then. But anyways, Henrietta, thank you very much for your support of the channel. We appreciate it very much. As always, thank you so very much. So up next, we have a $20 donation from Pete Hone, who says, Slava Ukraine, I'm starting to feel sorry for the Russian soldiers going to war in a Chevy Love pickup.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And I kind of feel sorry for the Russians that have gone into this war sometimes. And it's kind of mixed emotions, because every time I see a Russian get obliterated, I kind of feel sorry for them, because, of course, they're just the normal, like everyone on Earth, really. There's very few people out there who aren't normal. But they're really just a normal person who's just put in a situation like that, and then they get blasted. Then at the same time, of course, there's that part of me that feels a little bit of glee, because they are an invading force, and they are, of course, threatening Ukraine's sovereignty, killing civilians, killing the military, pushing them back sometimes in some places, and, of course, just causing general hell on earth for the areas that they've captured. And so, I kind of have mixed emotions there, but I usually weigh in on the side of I actually don't feel sorry for them, because there's really no time for sorrow in a war. Because if you get caught up in the emotions of they're just people, you're going to let those people roll over you and take over your country, and then those people are going to be carrying through on Putin's agenda, and that's actually an evil, sick guy. And so while the soldiers down there on the ground aren't necessarily all sick, some of them are, they commit war crimes, but while they all aren't sick, the guy at the top who's giving them the orders and they're doing his bidding, that guy's sick. And so you kind of cheer in that aspect. So I understand where you're coming from, and I hope that does weigh in on it pretty well, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to a question from the live chat real quick and throw one of those in.
And Enforcer, just a heads up, we do have quite a few super chats, so let me jump to real quickly to a live chat question here. Let's see. So it looks like we have one here from Ashley. This is actually a really good question. Ashley says, Enforcer, how long do the new NATO members have to change to standard NATO ammunition?
How long could you reread that one?
She's asking, when a country becomes a new NATO member, how long do they have to change to the standard NATO ammunition?
I don't actually think there's a deadline for that, but I feel like it's usually done within a few years' time. Of course, we see that most countries within NATO, I believe they either use the 308 round or the 5.56 round as their main caliber. I think the L85, if I'm correct, let me check the L85A2. Of course, a lot of people don't like this gun, but it actually uses the 5.56 round. Very interesting. I thought that there were still some NATO countries out there that used the 308 round, but apparently not. Well, maybe there is. I just don't know about it. But I think that it would be over the course of a few years, because of course that kind of shift isn't instantaneous. It does take time, and of course you still have to build up ammo reserves and such things like that. So I thank you very much for the question. It was a really good one, and I hope that does answer it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And how many super chats do we have, Matthew?
So let's see. It looks like we currently have about 15 to 16.
All right. So on to the next question.
So up next, we are paid a visit by Dick Cheney, which we haven't had in quite a while. So Will Riley puts in a $20 super chat and says, Dick Cheney believes that alcohol is the cause of and answer to all of life's problems. Can you see a situation where Putin and Zelensky come together somewhere with vodka and kick the crap out of each other?
Well, that's a really good question. You may not know this, but Zelensky actually did perform a comedy routine in front of Putin on occasion, here and there, before he became a politician. And that's really weird to me, because if you actually watch his comedy routines, they were crazy. I mean, like, they were actually really funny. Let me see if I can pull one up. Hopefully the footage wouldn't be copyrighted or anything. Zelensky comedy routine Putin. So let me see if I can find it. Oh man, I don't think they're gonna show it. That is sad. I saw it the other day. Him and another guy had their pants down and they were sitting behind a piano. And Putin was actually watching this in the audience. And they like mimed, like, you know, like taking their junk and like hitting the piano keys and playing a song on the piano. It was really weird. But once again, you know, I guess it's Ukrainian comedy. It was kind of funny in a way with just how weird and shocking it was, I guess. But that was really interesting to me that at one point they actually were looking at each other in person, and Putin was actually laughing at Zelensky's routine nearly uncontrollably. So that was interesting to me. Sadly, I don't think, Dick Cheney, that they would be able to get vodka and beat the crap out of each other. Of course, everyone always well, I wouldn't want that for Zelensky. Zelensky's a good guy. Honestly, he doesn't deserve to even get a single punch thrown at him. But of course, everyone always wants the politicians to just fight the things out. But I don't really feel like that's fair to Zelensky, because no one in Ukraine asked for this fight, not even him. Really, I think that everyone should just gang up and start beating Putin. So with that, I thank you very much for the support. Of course, Will Riley, the support is great, and it's great to see that Dick Cheney has returned in our chat. I love seeing Dick Cheney around, and so with that, I hope I answered the question, and we're moving on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from B. Wood, who says, I haven't slept a solid night in 92 evenings. Why don't we have at least 50% likes to viewers? This is one of life's unexplained conundrums.
I don't really know why the like to viewer ratio is low. While the like to dislike ratio is really high, we get like a 98% or higher like rate on all of our streams. The like rate is low, and I don't know why. It doesn't, like, likes help out a great deal, but it's not something I lose sleep over. But if you are losing sleep over it, if everyone can help him out and make sure that he gets some sleep tonight, please, everyone who's watching this stream right now, hit the thumbs up button. It helps us out a lot. It helps us to reach more viewers, and also that helps us to do better on Sunday fundraisers and such things like that. So please make sure to hit that like button, because in doing so, you can actually be helping out Ukraine in a very passive way, if you see what I'm saying. So I thank you very much for the support and also bringing that up, and I hope you get some solid sleep tonight. Hopefully we see a whole bunch of likes come in, hopefully above 3,000 or so real soon. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from VSOP. And please bear with me, this is a pretty acronym-heavy comment here. They say, hi from Oregon. What do you think of the Army's choice of switching from the M4 5.56x45 to the XM5x6R that shoots a bigger round, 6.8 millimeters, that can effectively destroy targets at 600 meters and beyond?
That's an interesting question. Usually I don't get into technical details a lot, but one thing I do know about a little is small arms and the calibers they use. But I'm going to make this question brief because, well, actually the answer brief, because I don't really get into things like barrel twist and stuff like that. I usually just get into punching power. I have fired every single gun from 22 up to 50 caliber. And that's also included 7.62, 5.56, but not 6.8. I think the closest I've gotten to 6.8 is 7.62 or 308 as they call it. The thing is that 5.56 rounds are incredibly small, and the actual size of the impact of the round is literally identical to a 22. That's why the other caliber designation for a 5.56 NATO round is a 223. It's literally that close to being the same width as a 22 caliber. It's just that it has a lot more power and velocity behind it. I'm not really a big fan of small calibers like that, just going to be honest. My preferred caliber of choice, and this is going to sound ancient, is the 30-06. I feel like the 30-06 has the ultimate punching power. While it's a large round, and so you can only use less of them. You know, of course, you can fit less of them in a magazine. It's still a heavy punching round, and nothing can slow that thing down. Like hitting bushes and shrubbery and maybe some twigs, that's not going to throw that thing off its path. It's going to keep going. I mean, like, hell, it'll go through one guy and through 6 others if they were all lined up in a row. And I'm really just more into more powerful, larger caliber cartridges, because I believe that when in a situation like that, you want the maximum amount of punching power. You don't want to hit someone and it makes the impact size of a 22, you know, like that. I don't like that. So I actually like that the Army is once again going back up into the larger caliber range of 6.8, because I feel like that's stepping back in the right direction. Over the course of history, surprisingly, we've always been trying to make the caliber smaller. A Brown Bess fires a 75 caliber round. actually a musket ball. But it fires a 75 caliber ball, and from 1740 up till now, the calibers kept on getting smaller. It went from 75 caliber to 50 caliber, and then down into the 30 caliber range, then went to the 7.62 range, and then finally we got down to around the 22 range. Now we're going back up, and I feel like it's a step in the right direction, considering that modern ballistics have definitely improved, at least the technology, and I think it is definitely a step in the right direction. Of course, larger caliber rounds do fire better. I kind of explained that a little bit earlier, and so I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question. Of course, I don't have any military experience, and I'm not any kind of I guess you could say small arms engineer or anything, but that, of course, is kind of like my lay opinion, since I do shoot a decent amount of guns, on why I like larger calibers rather than smaller calibers like the 5.56. So with that, I thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Billy Allen, who says, "Same as William, good stuff is on its way. Now we will see exactly how artillery is God. Thoughts?"
I do entirely agree. Artillery is something that has changed the course of history since 1444 with the fall of Constantinople. The Ottomans used artillery for the first time on a large scale during the siege of Constantinople, and it showed that defensive fortifications and also entire armies afterwards could be destroyed by nearly artillery alone. Of course, we know that Napoleon and a lot of the world's best, I guess you could say, strategic minds always focused on logistics and the artillery, and I think those are winning aspects of the war. And so I can agree that in this modern day still, artillery is the winning aspect of this war, and I do believe that is something that should be harped on a whole load, and a lot of countries should continue to send over the actual artillery pieces, the ammunition needed for them, and also the ability to continue to supply them and the infantry as well. Because infantry is, well, everything on the battlefield is nothing without the support of artillery. And also great logistical connections. And so with that, I hope I answered the question. I hope I weighed my thoughts in on that as well. Of course, take it with a grain of salt, because whenever I give my opinions, they're just my opinions. They can be wrong, and you can disagree with them. So just putting that out there in advance, but I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have another question from the live chat from Sweet Cheeks. He says, when will the families of these 30,000 Russian soldiers cause an uproar? I'm guessing a lot probably don't know yet.
Oh, they're never going to cause an uproar, because their kids are going to be on an infinite training exercise. They're never going to return. And also, the Russians will just flat out lie to them. Of course, it'll take them a while to connect the dots, and once they do, they'll be enraged. But they'll tell all of them, oh, they died in a training accident. And then everyone won't connect the dots for about a year until they find out so-and-so's kid also died in a training accident, and the other one, and the other one, and the other one. And then 10 people's kids in a village died in a training accident. And then they'll be like, hey, something doesn't make sense here. That war happened, and they've all died in training accidents. Then that's when everyone's going to get pissed off. They kind of did the same thing with the Kursk a little bit, is that they actually said for a bit, oh, your kid died in a training exercise. And then it came out later on that all of them had died in the Kursk incident, and then they all got pissed. So I hope that answers the question in a way. The Russians, of course, are very sly, and they lie to their civilians as well, even the families of those who have been killed. So I wouldn't doubt that they would do something like that. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that weighs in on my opinion of what will most likely happen. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from channel legend BC Skyman, who says, do you think Russia would have invaded if Ukraine still had their nukes?
I don't. Nah, they wouldn't have. No one ever risks a war with a nuclear power. I think the only time we've seen a war in between two nuclear powers is Pakistan and India. And no one knows that Pakistan and India both have nuclear arms, and not a lot of people know that they go to war often. So, if anywhere in the world was close to actually having a nuclear onslaught, it's these two. But still, that does show historically that there is a precedent for nuclear powers to attack other nuclear powers directly. But at the same time, here in Europe, that would be very questionable. At the same time, Ukraine never really had the budget or the means to actually maintain a nuclear arsenal. So the question of them even keeping them in the first place, would have been highly doubtful. But I hope that weighs in on the question. I hope that answers it to the best of my abilities. And I thank you very much for the support. Helps out this channel a great deal. And of course, without the support from our viewers, these streams can't run. And so by sending in the super chat, you help us to keep on running these things. And so I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And we have another question from BC Skyman, who puts in another $20 super chat and says, "Hello, Enforcer. Just a quick rundown. I was late today. Had they lost Severodonetsk?"
No, the Ukrainians have not lost Severodonetsk. They still hold on to the city, and it appears that the position is solidifying. The Russians have reached the Severodonetsk River on the western side of the front line, which means that an offensive to actually encircle the city will be very difficult, if not impossible for them. So I thank you very much for the support. Sorry you got here late. You know, I know that you already sent in 2 super chats, and I'm sorry that you got here late, but yes, we did go over that. And once this uploads this video, you can actually just rewind and find the spot, because of course I'll be floating around on the video replay around the Severodonetsk area, and you can hear about the situation there and what's going on. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that being said, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have an $18 super chat from Ryan Miller, who says, "Keep on keeping on."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, Ryan Miller, and we will keep on keeping on thanks to your super chat and helping this channel to keep running. Now I sound like PBS. Now I'm sounding like, we thank every taxpayer for keeping this channel running, and that's pretty much true at this point. I mean, that's the only way we can keep running. And so I thank you very much for the support, and with that being said, we will keep on keeping on, and we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we have an $18 super chat from Junebug72, another channel legend, who says, "We are all in this together. Happy Friday."
Well, thank you so much for the support, and also happy Friday to you too. I was thinking that probably not a lot of people are going to be watching these streams because it is the Memorial Day weekend, and a lot of people are going to be out enjoying and vacationing and stuff. Actually, just to let y'all know, there probably isn't going to be a Monday daily summary. Well, of course, there's no stream that day, but there may not be a summary that day either, because I'm actually going to be out reenacting that day for the first time in like a year. So just letting y'all know in advance, and I'm looking forward to it. That's the way I'm going to be spending my Monday off, is reenacting and wearing my Enforcer kit that you see in the profile picture. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next one.
And real quick, we do have a question from the live chat from Mick Ranger, who says, "I heard there was a Russian ship sunk that was trying to move dead Russian soldiers. Enforcer, I was wondering if you know anything about this."
Unfortunately, I do thank you for the support, by the way, but unfortunately, I haven't heard about that specific instance. I haven't heard of any ships being sunk recently. It sounds like the Black Sea Fleet has largely disengaged to a distance where they can't be shot and destroyed. And we also haven't heard any more news about Snake Island, which is down here. And it still pops up as Russian control. At this point, this thing has been here literally since the very first day. Well, actually, since like the second or third day of the war, and I've never gotten rid of it. So you're actually looking at something on this map that's been here for about 3 months at this point. But sadly, I haven't heard anything about that ship being sunk, so I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one because I haven't heard any news about it. But I do thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question, at least about the information I've gotten, which is none. And that being said, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from the Salmon Nation. S. Moore puts in a $15 donation and says, "An SOS was picked up by the Atlantic salmon sent from the rivers in the East Ukraine."
Yeast.
In the East
Where's
Ukraine.
East?
The message was received by Sylvia II, and she reports the channel catfish and bass say body parts are everywhere, ?
Well, I wouldn't doubt it. And I thank you very much for the support. Matthew pulled a Patrick Star from SpongeBob and he said, "Weast." And I like that. That was actually pretty funny. But that's actually pretty interesting to hear. And I do thank you very much for the support. Once again, it's great to hear from the Sockeye Nation. And I'm very happy to know that everyone, of course, supports this channel. I like the little joke. And I'm not really sure about body parts actually floating down a river in all seriousness. But I wouldn't doubt it, because there's been a decent amount of Russians, of course, that died in that area near the river. And so I'm assuming that some bodies may have been picked up by the current and dragged downstream. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does weigh into the question. And with that being said, thank you once again. It helps us out a lot that we do get support from our viewers to continue running. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Old Salty Squid, who says, "Hello, Enforcers. Enforcer, what, in your opinion, is the best World War I documentary and movie? Thanks for all you've been doing. I've been watching for a while now, and you guys never disappoint. Slava Ukraine."
I thank you so much for the support, and I love the kind words. And also, you've hit on something, and I think it's a perfect time to plug it because it's the best World War I movie / documentary that's ever been made. Actually, there's two, but one of them outclasses the other by far. The first one, the runner-up, is All Quiet on the Western Front as a movie, the 1979 version. Incredible movie. It kind of summarizes in movie form, in the best way possible. Of course, movies don't get it right all the time, but it does summarize what World War I was like for the average soldier. It's not glorified, it's not demonized. It literally just is what it is. It's literally almost straight out of the book. And so that's a really great movie. But the number one thing I suggest for people who want to see what the war was like is They Shall Not Grow Old. That was a documentary made incredibly soon. They Shall Not Grow Old. It's from 2018, and it was made by someone who did have a family member that served during the war, and they colorized loads of footage, put sound over it, lip synced it, and they actually showed what the war was like in the normal eyes of common soldier in the British Army. And I'd have to say it's the finest documentary that's ever been made on World War I, and it shows perfectly what the life of a British soldier and what soldiers in general in World War I was probably like. I was blown away by it. It is great. And if anyone who's asked what is the best World War I documentary / movie, this is the answer. And I more than suggest that every single one of y'all check this documentary out. It's the best of its kind. So with that, I thank you so much for the support and allowing me to plug something that I'm not even associated with, but I had to say the work that this man did was incredible. And so I thank you once again. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we have another $20 donation from Billy Allen, who says, "The Russian logistics train expand with each little village they take. New artillery blows their comm lines apart. What are your thoughts?"
Yes, the trains do, of course, have to extend each time the new front line is taken. But the problem is that the Ukrainians destroy the railroads as they retreat, and so not the British, the Russians have to bring in logistics units, most likely railroad brigades, to try and rebuild those railroads and then make the railheads as close to the front as possible. And so it's not really certain that they do that right now. But communication lines, you don't really have to worry about that stuff in a modern world all too much. And it does seem that the Russians have fixed the communication problems that they had during the Georgian War. I think that blowing away communication lines isn't too much of a deal because most communication in the military is done wirelessly now. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that being said, we're on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $10 super chat from Stephen B, who says, "Do you believe the offensive and buildup is a result of Putin's direct involvement in planning?"
I think it is. Largely the planning and the execution has been incredibly poor, very sloppy. While the Russians, of course, are backwoods and their military is poorly funded, compared to the Ukrainians, it should have done a lot better. And we've seen that it's done incredibly poorly. And I think that's all down to the decisions that Putin's been making, considering that he really has no military experience. Kind of like me. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Zero J Kwan, who says, "Enforcer, there was an article from thedrive.com that reported Ukraine intelligence discovered Russian equipment loaded with US-made microchips. Shows you how much Russia is reliant on foreign equipment."
That's very true, and I think that story was accurate. We know that the Russians are actually stealing the washing machines to get some of the tech out of it, some kind of processor or something like that, so that way they can put them inside of tanks because they're running out of them. But yes, that does show how reliant they are on Western gear and tech and such things like that, and the sanctions have hurt them heavily in that aspect. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Gregory Smith, who says, "International news, ? Ain't nobody got time for that. Whatever happened to your video on nuclear power, and thanks for what you do."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. We are still thinking about making the video of nuclear power, but the thing is that I went up there 3 times in a row and I filmed it where my face was shown. And then we found out in a poll here on the stream that it was almost a 50-50 split, that a lot of people didn't want me to reveal my face, and then a lot of people wanted me to. And it was such a split that I had to decide to throw out everything with the like in-person face reveal video. Also because I was kind of getting a little bit reluctant about it, and I was thinking people might come and try and kill me now that they know what I look like. Because you know what I'm doing is, you know, like I'm pro-Ukrainian to a point and give away so much information that I'm kind of scared that the Russians would try and poison me, because this happened to people before, and I don't want people poisoning me. And on top of that, I also have to worry about crazy lunatics out there that aren't associated with anyone and are just insane and want to blow my brains out because I talk. So I thank you very much for the support. We're still looking at making a video like that, but I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do it now without showing my face. And now the release date's kind of starting to drag on because I really don't know how I'm going to do that. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Vance Hicks, who says, Enforcer, 2 quick questions. Do you think the military movements by Belarus is just a demonstration designed to draw Ukrainian troops from the front? And do you think China is rethinking Taiwan at this point?
China has always been rethinking Taiwan, because Taiwan is actually a goal that they really can achieve, no matter how hard they want to say they can and how much they want to do it. They've been saying that stuff ever since the Republic of China's government has been pretty much exiled there since the 50s. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And to answer the question about Ukraine, yes, I would have to agree. And I'm trying to make the answers brief because I just found out we're about to enter marathon length streams here. But yes, I do think it's to tie up Ukrainian forces. This is a very passive action, but we do see that the Ukrainians are taking the threat a little seriously, and they're making sure to make shows of force near the border, like that training exercise we showed. Well, not really training exercise, more like that military exercise they conducted earlier today near the front line. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you so much for the support. It helps out our channel a great deal. And with that, we're on to the next question.
Next, we have a $10 donation from Vasily, who says, I want wings. Speaking of wings, I can't wait until more Switchblade videos come in. Enforcer, do you like wings, by the way? Also, any chance that LPDNR Plus will want to rebel against their RF puppeteers?
To answer the last part of that question first, I do think that the DPR and LPR citizens are not happy with the situation they're in. Problem is that the Russians are so deeply entrenched in their government system that if there's ever any kind of dissent publicly made, they just execute the politicians in charge of that and then have them replaced. So sadly, there's not really much they can do to rebel because the politicians are in Russia's pocket either, or they get killed. So that's kind of a tough one for them there. To answer the first part of that question, I do love wings. Wings are very good. Of course, I don't really eat them a lot, but I'm a big fan of wings. Usually I get them from Zaxby's, don't judge me, but I do like Zaxby's sauce, and they are pretty decent. You know, they're not dry or anything. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Stop the BS, who says, thanks, Enforcers. Your dedication is commendable.
First off, can you stop the BS? I'm just kidding with you. But I thank you very much for the support, and I am glad that you do enjoy our channel. In all seriousness, it always, of course, means a lot to me that a lot of people do enjoy the content I put out, and I put a lot of effort into it. And I'm glad to know that a lot of people want to keep seeing it coming, and they're making sure to support me so I can, you know, keep on doing this as a job. So thank you so much once again. That helps us out a great deal. And with that being said, we're going to stop the BS and we're going to move on to the next question. I had to make a play on that. Sorry about that.
And moving on, we have a $10 donation from another channel legend, Praise Adonai, who says, Enforcer, whatever happened to Santa Claus, Chechen, dressed in black at the Azovstal, who was always spouting off how good they were? I haven't seen him since the heavy shelling started. Where'd he go?
I don't know where he went. He may be dead, and if he is, the Russians will make sure to never make that public. But I'd never have known where he's gone either. He's largely disappeared for me too. So I thank you very much for the support. Unfortunately, I don't have any information to go off of to carry on, so it's all assumptions, and I'd assume he's dead, most likely. But with that, I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you greatly for your support. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And real quick, let me recognize an $8 donation from Cindy Mitchell. Thank you very much, Cindy, for your support of the channel. And up next, we have a $7.77 donation from Mike D, who says, I may not be able to supply Ukraine with an M777, but take this $7.77 donation as my gift to you. Godspeed and Slava Ukraine.
I thank you so much for the support. That was a really kind little comment right there. Very nice. And I'm glad that you do want to support this channel and keep us running, because while I always make it the main goal of trying to cheerlead our Sunday fundraisers and get as much support as possible, we always rely on the support of the viewers as well, you know, like running this channel, to make sure that we can keep everything running behind the scenes. And so I thank you so much once again for helping us to run this channel. And we do actually like help out Ukraine in a way. That's why Starsky is like more than happy to come on each time. Like, we'll ask him like, hey Starsky, is it if you want you can always come back on. He'd be like, good, I will be on next week. And we're like, what? It's like, we weren't even asking you to come on next week. We're just saying if you want to come on, that's fine, you know, if you want to come on again. And he's down for it. And he actually explained to us that he will literally never refuse, because we managed to get so much help for Ukraine here on this channel within like one stream or two. Each time he's come on, we've raised 50,000, 54,000, and then 34,000. So I mean, like, you know, we're actually helping out Ukraine, and I find that really neat. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. You are helping out in Ukraine in a way by helping us to keep running this channel. And so with that being said, thank you so much once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from H2O Barry Matt 1. That's a very interesting username you have there. They said, thanks, Enforcer, and keep it up, sir. Your knowledge is amazing, and your honesty is a nice thing to see. Slava Ukraine, bro.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I've touched on the other stuff before, you know, like knowledge, you know, it's like I have a little bit, but it's not a great deal. It's all history based. But one thing about honesty is that I always feel like it's more important to literally talk about what you know, instead of trying to pretend like you know something. And I feel like that's a better principle than what I see on some channels out there. Not naming any names, because a lot of channels actually know what they're talking about a pretty good deal. They stick to their niche. But then there's some channels out there where you can tell the person doesn't know what they're talking about. And also a lot of the major news companies do that as well, where they'll bring on someone and they call them like a military expert, and then they'll go up to a plane, they'll be like, you see, it has wings, and then that's all they say or something. And I always think that honesty is the best policy with this stuff. If I don't know something, I will just say it. You know, like I'll be like, I don't know, I assume it's this way, but I could be wrong. So I thank you very much for appreciating that. That's always something I try and observe, is to make sure not to fake my way through something. If I don't know it, I just say I don't know. So thank you very much once again for the support. And with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Randy Turner, who says, Enforcer and Matt, I'll be with you guys to the very end of this war to celebrate the defeat of Russia and Russia's aggression on Ukraine.
And I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad to hear that we have a stalwart Leaf Spring soldier that will be here until the end. Of course, the Leaf Spring Army will survive beyond this war. I hope that we can actually levy the army constantly, time and time again, whenever things like this happen, so that way we can make sure to provide all the support possible to around the world to, you know, whoever needs it. I think that would be really cool, and I think that would be a great tenet to run a modern YouTube news channel off of, is if we're covering a story, try and provide some kind of support to the people we're talking about. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad to hear that we have a dedicated, tried and true Leaf Spring soldier and veteran in the chat. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from John Kaler, who says, did you know heavy supply gliders are available?
I did not, actually. And in fact, I don't really know much about them. I just got done talking about honesty is the best policy, and I'm going to have to be honest there and say I don't really know much about them. But that is something interesting, and I think that the Ukrainians should look into them, perhaps, or see about having a foreign country provide them to them. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that addressed the comment in a way. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Justin Phillips, who says, keep on keeping on, guys.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. We already had someone say keep on keeping on, and we will keep on keeping on. So I thank you very much once again. I love that we're getting a lot of affirmation to keep on keeping on tonight, and so we will keep on keeping on, Don. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, and we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have another $20 donation from Billy Allen, who says, do you think the Russians are being led to an artillery kill zone in the Donbass? With all the new stuff they have, it looks like a slaughter is forming.
I would have to say that kill zones for artillery can be made anywhere. They can figure that out in advance wherever they want. So they don't actually have to drive the Russians into a kill zone. They just have to find a large Russian cluster and then start slamming it. But still, at the same time, I think that may be something they're doing, because of course, in a defensive war, it's always kind of nice actually to be able to give up a little bit of land and then slaughter the Russians that are entering that land. So that's something that they may be doing, and I'm not going to rule that out because that's actually a pretty decent strategy that we've seen some countries use before during war. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Donald Koss, who says, I've been here from the start, just not much money, trying to come up with a better joke than my Putin on the Ritz, but I don't want to be Russian into a new joke.
Oh man, he did it. I thought he was actually going to end it there, but he actually did it. Sadly, I'm going to be honest, that one isn't as good as Putin on the Ritz. Putin on the Ritz was a 10 out of 10 class joke. It was amazing. I remember I actually thought about that for a few days afterwards. But still, I thank you so much for the support. And it's totally fine. You know, of course, I'm not like trying to like strangle people to support the channel. Like, it's a voluntary thing, but it does help us keep running. But I do thank you so much for the support, and I do like that you tried at another joke. It was a good one, but I just gotta say, I mean, like, honestly, the Putin on the Ritz one is unmatchable. That was your best work, and I would just milk that thing dry. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that weighs in, and with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from C.A. Lags, who says they commissioned the Russian pickers for more tanks.
The Russian pickers for more tanks. I think I know what you're talking about there, and if I know what you're talking about, and I'm correct, I would have to agree, because the tanks they're getting are ancient at best, and they look like antiques. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that addresses the comment, and with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Old Fart Andy, who says, many of us would like to go to Ukraine to help contribute to rebuilding. Perhaps the enforcer can coordinate a group trip.
That would be something I would be interested in, but one thing that would be involved in that, of course, would be a face reveal, because I would have to meet people in person, and I couldn't wear that gas mask and everything everywhere because I get stopped by airport security and anyone who saw me wherever I went, because that stuff is very questionable looking. So I thank you very much for the support. I think I might try and look into that, but that's something that I honestly think would be out of my scope. I think I'd be kind of overwhelmed with that. But I do thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from El Fuego, who says, what can be done by NATO or others to get grain exports out through the Baltic Sea?
There's not really much to do. A blockade is a blockade, and the whole point of a blockade is to make sure that those ports aren't accessed by any country, including neutral nations. So, sadly, there's not really much we could do rather than going and destroying the Black Sea Fleet and just pushing straight through them. So, unfortunately, that's going to be the answer to the question. It's kind of a short one, but there's not really much to it. You know, like, a blockade is supposed to be a blockade. The British blockaded the Germans in World War I, and we saw that they would stop anyone and everyone who tried to pass through. Also, another example of a blockade is when the Union blockaded the Confederacy in the Civil War, and they would also seize and stop French and British ships that were trying to make it into southern ports. So I hope that answers the question in a way, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from the Beezer, who says, I experience chronic panic attacks. Any advice? And I'm new here, but I appreciate the incredibly detailed analysis. Great show and good education.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I hate to hear that you do suffer from panic attacks. My best advice, because I actually used to be a very worrisome person myself, but I never really had panic attacks. I was just always very anxious and stressed out. But one thing that helps me keep not really too stressed out about things is to just think, it's not really going to matter. That's a good way to go through life. Like, you just go do something. Like these streams, like this really started off, I was like, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to run streams, say what I want to say. If it does well, it does well. If it doesn't do well, it doesn't do well. No pressure. And that's kind of how I run it a little bit now. Of course there is a little bit of pressure because I feel like I need to deliver for 64,000 people. But still, usually going through life and really feeling like you don't really have to worry about it too much is a pretty good way to be. And while some people, while you may think, I can't be like that, I have to worry, because there's worrying things, nothing is too worrying. You're never going to die off of a decision you make. And that's kind of like my moniker for getting worried or not. So I hope that kind of addresses the question. Unfortunately, I'm not a licensed therapist, so I can't really give a perfect answer to that. But that's kind of how my life experience has gone, is that if you just go into everything thinking, I'll do fine. Who cares if I don't do fine? It's no big deal. No skin off of my back. You usually do okay, actually. You're pretty well. So I hope that answers just a question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And I hope that you have an okay, hope that you could fix the panic attack, and it turns out to be something that wasn't really a big deal, and it turns out to be okay. So I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you did find this channel just recently. And so with that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, I want to recognize 2 donations here. We have a $4 donation from R.M. Crosby, and we also have a $4 donation from John Doe. Thank you very much to both of you for your support of the channel. And moving on to our next one we have is from Fat Bass, who puts in a $4 donation and says, long-range MLRS will help save Ukrainian lives and culture.
I think it would. Culture is something that is really, really hard to ascertain. This is going to kind of lead me down a very short philosophical discussion. But culture, I think, is actually the bread and butter of what makes a country a country. Is not necessarily the population nor the people, it's the culture they have. Because one thing that I always think, and this is something that's always been in my head, is that the United States has a specific culture that's been exported around the world. It's hot dogs, hamburgers, baseball, surprisingly. It's not football, like American football. That's around, but not as much as baseball. And then cowboys. And so whenever I see in foreign culture an American depicted as a cowboy, I flip, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, it's an American. We've made it. We've made it on the foreign TV. And I think it's honestly the coolest thing. Like, I don't care how stereotypically they, like, the Americans are represented in foreign media. If I see an American, I'm flipping, because I think that's like the coolest thing that we're over there. Hopefully people feel the same way whenever they see an American media. Kind of like controversial figures. I guess you could say in the modern world, like Speedy Gonzales, and like the Tom and Jerry, well, not the Tom and Jerry cartoons, like the Cartoon Network stuff that used to be, because I kind of view like American stereotypes and stuff like they're really cool. So hopefully other people look at those like they're really cool, because they're not really supposed to be mean or anything. It's just kind of like a jest, I guess you could say, based off of what people think. But still, I think that Ukrainian culture, because Ukrainian culture is always the embroidered shirts, Cossacks, the saber-like swords, and it's a really cool culture, honestly. I actually say that Ukrainians have more of an identity with their culture than Russians do, because the only cultural things I can think about with the Russians is like ballet, and that's really it. Like, that's all I can think about with the Russians. That's all they've really got going for them is ballet. But the Ukrainians have all kinds of stuff, and so, like, honestly, I think that's more important to protect the culture and ensure that their people live on through their culture than it is to ensure that, I guess, you could say the population survives. But of course, you're ensuring that the population survives by protecting their culture. They're kind of one and the same. But I hope y'all understand what I'm saying, and I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question in a way. And so with that being said, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $4 donation from Simon Shorthouse, who says, China is not only a problem to Taiwan, it is trying to make alliances in the Pacific, and in fact sending spy ships to Australia. It's very concerning.
It is concerning, but one thing that everyone has to always remember is that the Chinese are an emerging power, and their military is probably about as far behind as the Russians, because they don't actually have a large military budget for the amount of GDP they have. that they have a burgeoning military, larger than the United States, at least in number, and that lets me know that in equipment, they must be lacking incredibly. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question. And I think people really shouldn't worry about China. I honestly view them as a paper tiger. Their economy relies entirely on exports, so it's entirely based on their standing around the world. So they can't really do too many dangerous plays, but it's not like their economy is self-sufficient or anything. And also, their military is not as great as people think. It's much like the Russians. It's been hyped up, but it's really nothing. So thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does weigh in on the question. And with that being said, we're on to the next one.
And our last super chat of the night goes to Rodrigo da Silva, who puts in a $3 donation and says, "Sup, I've been here since the first week, and it's clear how the channel became so cool as it evolved. Are we close to World War III? And shout out to the Enforcer gang."
And I thank you so much for the support, and also hearing that you are a trooper as well. I love to hear that we have a lot of Lee Spring Army veterans here, and also seeing people who actually watch this channel grow. Because about that time, we went from having around 8,000 or 6,000 subscribers to now we're 10 times the size, and we're around 64,000 subscribers. And it's honestly crazy to think that a lot of people have actually watched this channel grow. But still, really cool to me, honestly, to think that you've been around that long. And to answer that question, which I've answered a lot, actually, but still, it's a good question. I don't think we're that close to World War III anymore. It seems like things have largely simmered down. And while the Russian state TV is always throwing out threats, they throw out threats at everyone. I don't think any of those will actually be carried out. And we've seen the Russians simmer down on their tone overtures. And we've actually been seeing them trying to negotiate and bargain with the West to try and get some of the sanctions lifted. Like they said, we'll end the blockade of Ukraine if y'all lift the sanctions on Russia. Not really a fair deal. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one. But before we do, how many super chats do we have left?
So that was our last one for the night.
All right, and so with that, we're actually going to answer 2 live chat questions, since we've answered 2 live chat questions in the middle of the super chats, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream. And so with that, on to the first question.
Okay, so we have one from Stormzy Star Wars, who says, "I heard that the U.S. and Egypt with the Royal Navy may enter the Black Sea. I saw a vid by U.S. Daily News. Did you hear anything about that?"
I didn't, sadly. That's kind of a little bit out of my scope, because I didn't focus almost entirely on the actual frontline situation in Ukraine, and it's very rare for me to actually span out and do international news in a way that's outside of Ukraine's borders. But I will check and look into that and see if that is the case. Also, not to get too much into this stuff, but the Egyptians are actually building a brand new Cairo out here in the middle of the desert, which is really bizarre, and I think a lot of people should pull up a video and watch it, because it is really crazy. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it, and with that, we are on to the last question of the night. It's been a marathon stream, nearly 3.5 hours long, and so with that, what is the final question of the night, Matthew?
All right, and our final question of the night goes to Jethro Bradley, who says, "Enforcer, to what extent do you think other countries will see how Russia are struggling in Ukraine and be emboldened to stand up to Russia in any future invasions?"
I think everyone will. I mean, like, honestly, I think the United States knew this well in advance, because remember when everyone got outraged at the current government when they sat there and said, we're going to put down these sanctions, give it a month and see how it goes, and everyone was like, Ukraine's not going to last a month, it's going to last a week. I think they actually knew the situation beforehand and knew that the Russians were going to get bogged down incredibly soon. Of course, I think that's something weird for the Department of Defense to focus on, is how Ukraine would defend itself against the Russian Federation. But at the same time, they had about 8 years to prepare that answer. So I think that now that the entire world is seeing how much of an embarrassment the Russians are, a lot of countries are going to be taking advantage of them. For example, the Chinese aren't going to attack them or anything, but they're definitely going to take economic advantage of them, and then, you know, pretty much just brush them off if they ever threaten them with anything. Also, a whole bunch of other countries, especially the Western line countries, once again have had like their hegemony kind of like enforced by seeing how weak Russia is and seeing that there really is no comparable power out there that can face them down. I'm talking about all of Western Europe and the United States combined. So in that regard, I think that a lot of people are going to start kicking the Russians around here in the future. So I thank you very much for the question. It was a pretty good one, actually, and I hope that did answer it pretty well, at least as far as my opinion goes. And so with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. It's been a wonderful night tonight. I hope that y'all all have enjoyed the news. Of course, it's always a pleasure and an honor for me to report the news to so many people who look forward to this stream every single night. And I do thank so many of y'all for y'all's support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because once again, without y'all's support, I can't run the thing. So I thank you all once again. It does help us out greatly. And with that, I will see y'all all tomorrow for the Saturday night stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the next 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. We're only 7 days away from day 100, and then beyond that, every single day that this war goes on will be in the triple digits, and will be a war to go down in the books for sure. So once again, I thank you all, and I hope you all have a great night. Hey everyone, it's the Enforcer again. I know that this is after the stream, so it's kind of weird, but I just want everyone to know that I thank you all so much once again for enjoying the stream. I was actually thinking about it after the stream ended, and I just wanted to tell you all, once again, thank you. Y'all don't know how much the Lee Spring Army means to me, and how proud I am that all of y'all enjoy my content, and that I have such a wonderful community. So, I thank you all once again. Just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much, and I hope y'all all do have a great night. So good night, and take care.